Chapter 2591, Oppression of the World Rumbling. Under the vast soul power's impact, the sky-filled sword intent began to slowly fade away. Soul world at the profound achievement. This guy is definitely a heaven ultimate god in his peak. Jian Wushuang's heart was heavy. Every improvement step in Principal World was extremely difficult. Likewise, Jian Wushuang had finally set up his very own sword world more than 10 years ago. At that time, he was only capable of displaying the introductory level. 10 years after he killed Sen Shouwang and became the Northern Darkstar Territorial Lord, his greatest improvement was his sword principle understanding, but it only allowed him to progress from the introductory level to the merit level. In fact, he barely crossed over into the merit level. This was because of his exceptionally high capabilities in understanding principle. He had a couple of enlightenment in the process, which sped up his progress. An ordinary cultivator probably needed a long time to do the same. Most Earth Ultimate Gods only managed to achieve the introductory level in Principal World with only a few top-tier, high achievers capable of reaching the merit level. Jian Wushuang was one of those few. Only Heaven Ultimate Gods could reach the profound achievement in Principal World. In fact, many weaker Heaven Ultimate Gods, or those at the lower tier, were unable to achieve that level. The soul world displayed by Zhonghun was similar to a Principal World, albeit slightly weirder. In that sense, only a Heaven Ultimate God was capable of displaying a profound achievement soul world. Jian Wushuang sneered. It's shameful for a Heaven Ultimate God like you to come to a small stellar region like the Northern Darkstar Territory and absorb soul power from cultivators to recover your strength. You really are miserable. Regardless, you are not in your peak state now. Do you think you can crush me with your soul world alone? You must be dreaming. As soon as you said that, Jian Wushuang's eyes flashed with a cold sword light. Boom, boom, boom. Countless stronger sword intent than he previously displayed appeared. Jian Wushuang no longer reserved his strength as his 100,000 miles sword world was completely displayed. That terrifying sword intent swept around wildly from its sudden power surge and crashed on the soul world. Wow! The palpable soul power that filled heaven and earth quickly disappeared like the tides. It was being compressed to what seemed like a small area. How can it be? Zhonghun was shocked. A merit-level sword world has suppressed my profound achievement soul world. How wide is his sword world? 80,000 miles? 90,000 miles? No, even a 90,000 miles sword world cannot possibly achieve this effect. Is it possible his sword world has reached the ultimate distance? Zhonghun was shocked. He believed Jian Wushuang's sword world had likely reached the ultimate distance, which was 99,999 miles. However, it was still an understatement. Jian Wushuang's sword world was the most perfect 100,000 miles sword world. The perfect sword world was much stronger than the so-called ultimate sword world. Boom! The sky-filled sword intent continued to engulf Zhonghun's soul world and shrunk it again until it almost collapsed. Oh God! Zhonghun was terrified and at the same time felt an unprecedented shocking force on him. He was a Heaven Ultimate God who had seen countless powerful experts. The Principal World displayed was very impressive and had a powerful deterrent effect. However, he had never experienced something of a similar deterrent effect. The huge sword world enveloped Jian Wushuang as he had also made a move. Wow! The icy, dazzling sword light slashed out and destroyed everything that crossed its path. Zhonghun finally took it seriously as used the spear in his hand to instantly parry the sword light. However, his strength was greatly weakened from the sword world's oppression. Clang! There was a crisp sound as the black spear was slewed by the sword light. Jian Wushuang's long sword took the opportunity to thrust forward with its blade aimed directly at Zhong Hun's neck, like harvesting wheat. Zhong Hun's face sank and abruptly retreated. During his retreat, he stretched out his right hand and pointed towards the void ahead. Soul Devil Hell! Buzz! The vast soul power burst out frantically. The soul power was as vast as the sea. In the blink of an eye, the void turned into a huge 100-foot-tall demon shadow with 3 heads and 6 arms. Each of the strong 6 arms was holding a thick black soul chain. After it took shape, whip, 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 the demon shadow's arms swung those 3 chains and slammed fiercely toward Jian Wushuang's sword shadow. Jian Wushuang was immediately forced to retreat. Just when he regained his foothold, Buzz, the vast soul formed again on both sides of the voids around him as 2 similar 100-feet-tall statues with 3 heads and 6 arms, each holding a black soul chain formed. There are 3 demon shadows, with each having 6 black soul chains, a total of 18 soul chains. In an instant, swash, 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 the soul chains frantically waved and attacked Jian Wushuang concurrently from 3 directions. Jian Wushuang also immediately waved his longsword to ward off the attacks, throwing the chain out and away from him. Just as he knocked those chains away, Zhong Hun melted into the surrounding void filled with a large amount of soul power and had completely turned into darkness. Jian Wushuang immediately spread his soul power as he disappeared. Although Jian Wushuang could feel Zhong Hun was still somewhere in the surrounding void, his exact location could not be found. I must say that Zhong Hun is quite good. Jian Wushuang's eyes narrowed. Zhong Hun was well hidden in one of the voids among the surrounding dark voids. He stared closely toward Jian Wushuang, who was fighting frantically with the 3 demon shadows in the dark void's center. I've looked down on this Northern Darkstar territorial lord and didn't expect his strength to be so great, forcing me to use Soul Devil Hell. It seems my Soul Devil Hell can't do much harm to him with my current recovered soul power, murmured Zhong Hun. He could see that the 3 demon shadows were showing terrifying power, with the 18 soul chains also launching incessant attacks on Jian Wushuang. However, Jian Wushuang, with his sword and sword world that seamlessly complemented his strength, managed to knock the 18 soul chains. The 3 demon shadows were unable to gain the slightest advantage against Jian Wushuang, let alone to kill Jian Wushuang. The only way to wipe him out is probably that trick. Chapter 2592, Wiping Out the Soul. Zhong Hun was hesitating. He was a genuine heaven ultimate god and good at soul attacks. He had many techniques, but yet to fully recover his soul power, which was merely at the peak earth ultimate god realm. Therefore, most of his techniques' full strength could not be displayed. For example, the Soul Devil Hell which he displayed did not harm Jian Wushuang. Based on his current strength, there was only one technique he was able to display confidently to kill the Northern Darkstar territorial lord. The only concern remains in the extreme difficulty of using that technique at his current strength level, hence his hesitation. The Northern Darkstar territorial lord is only a primary level Earth ultimate god, but his combat power is very impressive. Especially in the principal world, he has opened up the ultimate sword world. Such a genius must have previously obtained some useful and valuable opportunities, with the opportunities probably being kept in his interspatial ring. I suspect his armor has also reached the heavenly treasure level. Zhong Hun was secretly groaning. Although using that technique is very taxing when I'm already in such a serious injury state, and my not completely recovered strength, I can always absorb more cultivator's soul power. Let's do it. Zhong Hun decided with a sharp light shone in his eyes. The surging soul power rose in an instant and very obviously became as vast as the sea. It immediately began to compress at an astonishing speed after its emergence and formed a black halo in the blink of an eye. He then violently slapped his forehead between his eyebrows and spat out 2 drops of bright red blood essence. The 2 drops of blood essence integrated into the black halo and instantly skyrocketed his divine power breath. Secret technique, God's punishment. Zhong Hun screamed in his heart as a dark soul beam burst out from the black halo. The soul power contained in the soul beam was terrifying. After the beam was unleashed, Zhong Hun's complexion instantly turned pale, but a glimpse of a grin could be seen in his eyes. Zhong Hun had to pay a huge price to unleash that blow. It was the strongest move he could use at that time, with its power comparable to a soul attack he could display at his peak. It also meant that the blow was an attack of the Heaven Ultimate God level. I don't believe you can survive this blow. Zhong Hun was confident. The soul beam zoomed across the void. The surrounding became quiet as though there were no movements at all. Jian Wushuang had been combating the 3 huge demon shadows, which did not harm him. At the same time, he had been vigilantly keeping an eye on the surrounding void, and knew the hiding Zhong Hun in the surrounding void might cast a soul attack on him at any time. The soul beam swept toward Jian Wushuang as expected. Jian Wushuang was startled with no techniques he could use to ward off the soul attack. He could only depend on the exquisite pagoda in his sea of consciousness to withstand the attack. Boom! The terrifying soul beam blasted fiercely on the exquisite pagoda as the pagoda wildly shook and almost gave way. The soul beam suddenly evolved. It was originally a beam, but quickly turned into a soul spear that was so sharp it pierced a hole through the exquisite pagoda, a hole that exposed Jian Wushuang's soul to the soul spear. Oops! Jian Wushuang's expression drastically changed. Boom! The soul spear carried a shocking power and bombarded Jian Wushuang's soul. Jian Wushuang's soul was not strong without the exquisite pagoda's protection. His cultivation period in that lifetime was too short, and his cultivation realm was too low after all. He was only a high-level ultimate god, and so was his soul power level. His soul was only stronger and more tenacious than a similarly leveled cultivator, because he was a perfect chaotic creature. However, no matter how tough his soul was, it was only a high-level ultimate god's soul. How could he possibly withstand a heaven ultimate god's soul attack? Jian Wushuang's entire soul was instantly penetrated by the soul spear, which exuded a monstrous power and completely crushed Jian Wushuang's soul. Jian Wushuang's tangible soul was completely crushed and obliterated. Jian Wushuang's figure completely stopped and suspended there. Zhong Hun, who was watching the entire scene in the surrounding dark void, wore a wide grin on his face. Indeed, he's just a primary level Earth ultimate god after all. Zhong Hun laughed, and he wanted to move forward. He sensed Jian Wushuang's soul had been completely wiped out, and it was impossible for one who was dead to die again. He had no scruples since Jian Wushuang was dead. As his figure was about to move, he halted once again. He noticed Jian Wushuang, who was dead with his soul completely wiped out in the void up front, opened his eyes again and looked straight at Zhong Hun with his cold eyes. What? Zhong Hun was stunned. Are you there? Jian Wushuang's eyes were cold as he instantly applied the secret star technique. As soon as he used the secret technique, the divine power breath on his body instantly soared as his aura leaped from the primary level Earth Ultimate God to high-level Earth Ultimate God under the Black Stone's disguise. At the same time, an infinite golden divine power swept out crazily before the 3,000 feet tall golden god shadow suddenly formed behind him. Jian Wushuang made a move. A total of 300 apparitions were created at the same time, with that single move that was located everywhere. The three demon shadows which were surrounding him could not tell which was the real Jian Wushuang, as they could only frantically wave those black soul chains around, and tried their best to attack the real Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang's real self went past those three demon shadows and aimed straight at Zhong Hun. This is impossible. Zhong Hun was flabbergasted, as he did not expect that to happen. Based on his knowledge, it was impossible for the situation before to happen. The Northern Darkstar, territorial lord in front of him, was dead with his soul completely penetrated, crushed, and obliterated. His soul was completely wiped out. Not even an undying saint with an immortal body was able to survive under those circumstances. However, he was alive. Jian Wushuang was still alive. His soul was obliterated, yet he was still alive and could still carry on attacking with his combat power barely affected. Chapter 2593. Kill! How on earth could he survive after his soul was completely wiped out? This territorial lord is strange. I'd better escape. Zhong Hun immediately thought of retreating upon seeing Jian Wushuang, who was launching an attack on him. He dared not shilly-shilly anymore, and immediately turned around to flee. Suddenly, rumbling, in the blink of an eye, Zhong Hun and his surrounding void were completely covered by the sky-filling golden divine power ocean. A huge golden prison appeared out of thin air. It completely occluded the void, which was Zhong Hun's escape route, and crushed all hopes of his escape. Damn it! Zhong Hun finally panicked. He was once hunted down by two assassins when his strength was at its peak. At that time, he did not panic even when he was pushed to a dead end, as the situation at that time was different. He had an exit plan and a chance to escape. Hence he managed to do so in the end. However, the golden prison's appearance placed him at a ghost of a chance to escape. Boom! The terrifying 100,000 miles sword world was fully displayed. As soon as Zhong Hun turned his head, he saw Jian Wushuang, who was some distance away, emerged right in front of him after a strange delusional move. It was so fast, as though Jian Wushuang teleported himself. On the next second, Jian Wushuang wielded his sword. The Blood Mountain sword silently went forth as heaven and earth seemed to have completely overlapped with space-time. A weird, fleeting sword shadow burst into view and disappeared. Space-time sword technique, 6th form, overlapping shadow. How can it be so fast? Zhong Hun's eyes enlarged with his mouth wide open. However, after the sword shadow disappeared, so was his head, which flew out and away from his neck. Zhong Hun had not recovered from the shock, but his vitality had already begun to dissipate. As Zhong Hun's body fell feebly, the 3 huge demon shadows at his back had also disappeared into thin air. Jian Wushuang's golden prison had also slowly faded away as he recollected his divine power breath until the surrounding void finally calmed down. You're a heaven ultimate god who's exceptionally skillful with soul attacks. Even though you're injured and not at the peak of your power, you can still perform a heaven ultimate god level soul attack. Your attack is indeed powerful, but it's a pity you've met me, murmured Jian Wushuang as he stood towering over Zhong Hun's body. Zhong Hun's soul attack was indeed extremely powerful. Jian Wushuang's exquisite pagoda, which he had cultivated up to the 2nd level, was nonetheless still destroyed by Zhong Hun's soul attack. As a consequence, Jian Wushuang's soul was also obliterated by the soul attack's frontal penetration. Any ordinary expert would have died under such circumstances. However, Jian Wushuang was different. As the most unique and perfect chaotic creature in the world, the abilities he possessed were incomparable to ordinary cultivators. Although he was only at the ultimate god realm, he had an immortal body. His immortal body was even more powerful and perfect than an undying saint's. The immortal body of an undying saint could only rely on one's divine power to quickly restore the divine body. It had little use in recovering the soul. On the other hand, Jian Wushuang's immortal body was able to instantly restore his divine body as well as his soul. His soul had indeed been wiped out by Zhong Hun. However, he was able to recover his soul using his immortal Bodhis abilities. Such abilities were simply a fantasy among ordinary cultivators. Only perfect chaotic creatures had such abilities. Zhong Hun's soul attack was unquestionably powerful, and any ordinary earth ultimate god would have died under his attack. However, Jian Wushuang survived with his perfect immortal body, which was a nemesis to any cultivator who was good at soul attacks. His body was able to perfectly reflect all types of soul attacks by any cultivator. In Jian Wushuang's case, attacks of the flesh might destroy him, but his body was impermeable to soul attack no matter how strong it was. A heaven ultimate god must be a top-tier expert in the Danyang holy domain. He must have quite a lot of wealth. Jian Wushuang's eyes flashed with a strange luster as he waved his large hand and annihilated Zhong Hun's body with a huge divine power before starting to count the items left behind by Zhong Hun. He was indeed wealthy as a heaven ultimate god. He had approximately 6 million to 7 million primordial stones left in his interspatial ring, but the more interesting part was his myriad of cultivation resources, secret techniques, treasures, and the like. Although Jian Wushuang was not able to estimate the values of those cultivation resources, as well as Shao Tiexin, he was still able to come up with a simple estimation. The various cultivation resources in Zhong Hun's interspatial ring and the primordial stones should worth around 15 million primordial stones in total. In addition, Zhong Hun also possessed some special treasures. Jian Wushuang flipped his hand as a black spear, black armor, and ancient gray stone staff appeared in the void in front of him. Jian Wushuang knew the black spear, which Zhong Hun used to fight against him in the duel, was a heavenly treasure offensive divine weapon. Its power was quite extraordinary. Meanwhile, the black armor, which transformed from the black robe worn by Zhong Hun, was a heavenly treasure level defensive armor. A defensive armor was 10 times more valuable than an offensive divine weapon of the same level. The heavenly treasure level defensive armor was amazing. Previously, San Shouwang had decided to attack Jian Wushuang because of the heavenly treasure level defensive armor on Jian Wushuang. Although both treasures were extremely unusual, they were of no use to Jian Wushuang. Needless to say, Jian Wushuang used a sword instead of a spear, while his golden glass armor, which was also his life armor, was more powerful than the black defensive armor. Moreover, the black defensive armor would become more inferior to the golden glass armor as his strength continued to improve. Jian Wushuang put the black spear and the black armor back into the interspatial ring with a wave of his hand before looking at the gray stone staff. The gray stone staff exuded an ancient aura breath with a vague layer of power surrounding the stone staff. It was soul power. Jian Wushuang could tell at a glance the gray stone staff was some sort of soul treasure. As soon Jian Wushuang took ownership of the gray stone staff, the message contained within was immediately channeled into his mind. It was a spiritual stone staff, an offensive divine soul weapon at the heavenly treasure level. Indeed, it's an offensive divine soul weapon at the heavenly treasure level. Jian Wushuang secretly admired. Soul treasure, regardless of an offensive or defensive divine soul weapon, was extremely rare and precious among treasures of the same level. For example, a heavenly treasure level defensive armor was 10 times more valuable than an offensive divine weapon of the same level. An offensive heavenly treasure level divine soul weapon was even more precious than a defensive armor of the same level. Chapter 2594. Witchcraft and Wizardry Sect. Jian Wushuang murmured. I reckon this stone staff probably helped Zhong Hun to execute that magnificent soul attack. Although I know about soul attacks, it's not my forte, and this stone staff is only useful for me to a certain extent. A cultivator had limited capacity to cultivate, and that applied to even super geniuses. Jian Wushuang was a prime example. He meticulously studied sword principles and sword techniques, and was also working on sharpening space-time law, transmigration law, and several other extremely powerful secret techniques at the same time. Under those circumstances, he was unable to split his attention into researching soul power. His soul had improved over the years, with the only progress being in increasing his soul power. He did not work on mastering soul attack techniques. It did not mean that he was uninterested in pursuing the area, just that he had too much on his plate. Someone powerful like Zhong Hun, who was good at soul attacks, probably spent more than 90% of his life perfecting his techniques, and would therefore know all kinds of soul techniques to open up his very own soul world. The downside was that his attack towards one's body would probably be weaker. Jian Wushuang could only focus on attacks of the body. In terms of soul attacks, he might study and perform soul attacks when necessary, but it was impossible to compare with those experts who immersed their time in studying the soul techniques. After letting out a couple of sighs, Jian Wushuang put the stone staff into the interspatial ring before flipped his hand again, revealing two special item types. They were a few golden beads and a token. Jian Wushuang recognized the golden beads at a glance. It was the soul golden bead. The golden beads were filled with a lot of soul power. He could sense the soul power contained within was impure. There was a lot of resentment within, to be precise. It was not surprising, as these were the souls Zhong Hun stripped from the official army soldiers. Was he not worried his state of mind would be corrupted after absorbing and refining soul power, which had such huge resentment to restore his strength? A trace of anger flashed in Jian Wushuang's eyes. Thereafter, he tightened his grip around the golden beads and directly crushed them along with the soul power contained within. Jian Wushuang finally looked at the token. At first glance, the token looked ordinary and inconspicuous among the treasures found in Zhong Hun's interspatial ring. Jian Wushuang only noticed it because of the unique, indescribable aura it exuded. He held the token in his hand and cautiously channeled his soul power into the token. As soon as his soul power sipped into the token, he sensed an astounding power contained therein. The power formed a huge but unclear human face which opened his mouth and swallowed Jian Wushuang's soul power. Jian Wushuang was greatly startled. Witchcraft and Wizardry Sect. His pupils narrowed slightly. Witchcraft and Wizardry Sect was the message he received from the human face after it swallowed his soul power. The token must be related to the Witchcraft and Wizardry Sect. Witchcraft and Wizardry Sect? It must either be a powerful force or a sect. Judging from this token, this sect is anything but ordinary. I wonder if Zhong Hun was a member of the Witchcraft and Wizardry Sect, Jian Wushuang muttered. He had never heard of the Witchcraft and Wizardry Sect, nor was he interested in it. Judging from Zhong Hun's skills and techniques, he was very likely a member of the Witchcraft and Wizardry Sect. It doesn't matter where he's from. What matters is that I've killed him and gotten quite a fair bit of benefits from him. That's enough. Jian Wushuang smiled and felt quite happy in his heart. There was only 1 year away from the Star-Picking Pavilion's auction. Jian Wushuang was worried his assets were insufficient to buy the stately painting from the auction. It was fortunate that Zhong Hun came. He had gained resources and treasures worth about 15 million primordial stones, as well as the 3 precious heavenly treasures from Zhong Hun, adding the divine destructive beast secret technique he got from San Shou Wang. He finally had a substantial amount of wealth to bid at the auction with confidence. After killing Zhong Hun, Jian Wushuang had no reason to stay in the forest. Hence he returned to the military camp. Xiao Qiexin, Song Heng, Mo Shan, and the others greeted him upon his return. "Master, are you okay?" Xiao Qiexin asked. "I'm all right." Jian Wushuang smiled slightly. "Territorial Lord, have you found that demon?" Mo Shan asked. "I found and killed him," replied Jian Wushuang. "Killed?" Mo Shan and the others were startled. All of them had dealt with the demon before, and he was known to be powerful with despicable means. In addition, the demon's strength must have improved by leaps and bounds after killing so many soldiers and absorbing their soul power, according to Jian Wushuang. Although Jian Wushuang was the territorial lord, he was merely an earth ultimate god. All of them thought it would be good if Jian Wushuang could defeat the demon and rid him from the Northern Darkstar territory. Surprisingly, Jian Wushuang had beheaded and killed the demon. Was he really beheaded and killed? Many people, especially those experts from Qinhu Wilderness, were not entirely convinced. Jian Wushuang, of course, knew what was on their minds, judging from their expression change. He immediately flipped his hand, and a dark spear appeared in his hand. Mo Shan, your 2 battalions fought with the demon before, so you should be familiar with the weapon he used. Is this the weapon that the demon used? Jian Wushuang smiled. Mo Shan was startled before he nodded incessantly while staring at the black spear. Yes, it's a spear. The breath of aura is the same as the divine weapon used by that demon. He's really killed. The soldiers, as well as those powerful experts from Qinhu Wilderness, were overjoyed and were completely convinced. If the territorial lord had that divine weapon, the demon must have been killed by the territorial lord. All hail, territorial lord. Territorial lord, thank you for solving this crisis for Qinhu Wilderness. All the sects and cultivators in Qinhu Wilderness are truly grateful. Voices of awe and gratitude sounded one after another. Jian Wushuang did not pay much attention to them. Mo Shan, you should stay and sort out the aftermath. Shiner and Song Heng, let's go back. Jian Wushuang waved his sleeve and was already on his way toward the territorial lord mansion. Chapter 2595. Visitors after returning to the territorial lord mansion, Jian Wushuang handed over the mansion's matters to Xiao Qiexin and Song Heng before going into seclusion again. His only purpose for going into seclusion was to refine the primordial stones and make a breakthrough to peak ultimate god. He was able to display the powers of a primary level earth ultimate god when he discharged his divine power. Nonetheless, his real divine power was merely at the high-level ultimate god under the black stone's disguise. He was still a step away from becoming peak ultimate god. He wanted to cross into the higher cultivation realm before the auction started. That was his desire. However, he was uncertain if it could be done at his will. The divine power contained in the primordial stones was no longer enough for him after all. Although the divine power was vast enough, its purity was far from sufficient. However, he could attempt crossing over to the peak ultimate god realm with such a large number of primordial stones at his disposal. He was really uncertain if he could make a breakthrough, so he could only try his best. A month passed in a blink of an eye. In the void above Northern Darkstar territory, 2 figures were heading in the territorial lord mansion side by side. Those 2 people, which consist of a man and a woman, looked very young. We should be arriving at the territorial lord mansion soon. I really want to see what the Northern Darkstar territorial lord, who killed Zhong Hun, looks like. A handsome white-robed young man smiled. Senior brother, don't you think you're expecting too much of the Northern Darkstar territorial lord? He probably just got lucky. How good could he be? A red-clothed girl next to the young man pouted. Junior sister, don't underestimate him, or should I say don't underestimate Zhong Hun. Zhong Hun was from the witchcraft and wizardry sect, who are extremely cunning with their despicable means. Both of us paid a huge price to force him into a dead end. I thought he was going to die, but he managed to escape from under our noses with his trump card. Even if he was hurt and suffered from the backlash to the point that he lost his strength, someone like him was easy to be killed. However, he ends up dying in the hands of the territorial lord. I don't believe the territorial lord is just lucky and inept, said the young man. He knew exactly how difficult it was to deal with Zhong Hun. It was why he became curious about the Northern Darkstar territorial lord who killed Zhong Hun. We're here. The duo arrived in front of the territorial lord mansion and stopped. Territorial lord. The young man shouted with his loud and clear voice, which reverberated every corner of the mansion, including the underground palace's secret chamber where Jian Wushuang was. Jian Wushuang heard the young man. Jian Wushuang, who had remained in the secret chamber to refine primordial stones while trying to find ways of making a breakthrough to the peak ultimate god realm, immediately opened his eyes and furrowed his brows slightly. The very next second, he took action and appeared in the void above the mansion before the two youngsters. The two of you, Jian Wushuang looked at the two people in front of him and was shaken up. Heaven Ultimate God. These two people are both at the Heaven Ultimate God realm. The two of them did not hide their divine power breath. Hence Jian Wushuang noticed their realm at a glance. Those two were genuine Heaven Ultimate God experts, and unlike Zhong Hun, both were at their peak, especially that handsome young man. The young man just stood there. Although he did not make any move, he was exerting an invisible pressure on Jian Wushuang. The pressure he exuded was much stronger than any Jian Wushuang had ever experienced in his current life. He was a terrifying Heaven Ultimate God. Jian Yi, a pleasure to meet the two masters. Jian Wushuang was respectful toward the experts and saluted them slightly. Is Jian Yi your name? The handsome young man looked at Jian Wushuang with a gentle smile on his face. My name is Su Qin, and this is my junior sister, Lu Xiener. We're both here to meet the territorial lord. I wonder why the two of you are looking for me. Jian Wushuang asked. Hang on. Could you invite us into your mansion first? Su Qin asked. Of course. Please, masters. Jian Wushuang led the two of them to his mansion. In a majestic hall, the three of them sat down on a table respectively as Xiao Tiexin and several maids brought food and wine. Xiner, you may leave first, ordered Jian Wushuang. Yes. Xiao Tiexin nodded and peeked at the Su Qin duo before leaving. After they left, Jian Wushuang waved his hand and set up a heavy restrictive shield around the hall. Masters, could you please tell me about the matter now? Jian Wushuang remained humble but unperturbed. Jian Wushuang was capable of fighting against a Heaven Ultimate God and even an undying saint. There was no need for him to be afraid, as opponents at those levels were no longer able to kill him. Territorial Lord, the two of us are here only for one matter. I wonder if you've heard of Zhong Hun? Su Qin smiled and studied Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang remained a straight face, but his heart skipped a beat. He guessed those two people were probably there for Zhong Hun and was proven to be right. I do know Zhong Hun. I killed him. Jian Wushuang was straightforward. He knew very well the two people must have learned the news of him killing Zhong Hun, and he would not quibble at all. The two masters came to me because of Zhong Hun. I guess both of you must be the ones who caused him to be in such a miserable state. Jian Wushuang asked, Why are you so sure? Can't we be Zhong Hun's comrade? You ought to know that Zhong Hun came from an impressive background. Su Qin smiled. Zhong Hun was indeed powerful. However, I'm sure he had no companions, at least none in Danyang Holy Domain. Otherwise, he could have sent a message to his companions and asked them for help instead of hiding alone in a deserted area under my northern Darkstar territory. Why would he choose to rely on killing and absorbing the soul powers of some ordinary cultivators to restore his strength? Jian Wushuang said, "That's right." Su Qin nodded and immediately smiled. "We are indeed the ones who severely injured Zhong Hun and wanted to directly kill him, but his impressive life-saving technique saved him and allowed him to escape. We have been looking for his traces in the nearby territory all this time, but to no avail. Not too long ago, we received news that Zhong Hun was killed by the Northern Darkstar Territorial Lord." Chapter 2596, Divine Elixir Pill. After Zhong Hun was hit hard by the two of us, he displayed a life-saving secret technique, which drastically reduced his strength. Anyhow, he was a genuine heaven ultimate god after all. He had always been good at soul attacks, and was not one to be trifled with. You must have something up your sleeves to be able to kill Zhong Hun. Su Qin smiled. "I was just lucky. If he was at his peak or had recovered his strength to about 70 or 80%, I will have to run when I see him," said Jian Wushuang. "Perhaps." Su Qin smiled faintly and paused before continuing to say, "Territorial Lord, although you killed Zhong Hun, there's something in his interspatial ring that is extremely important to me and my junior sister." "What is it?" Jian Wushuang's expression remained unchanged, but was quite wary. He knew Su Qin must have a purpose for the visit. Jian Wushuang was leaning toward believing they were there for Zhong Hun's treasures. Jian Wushuang was surprised to hear that they were only after one thing. "It's a token, a very special token. You can have a look at Zhong Hun's interspatial ring and should be able to find it in the ring," said Su Qin. "A special token?" Jian Wushuang raised his brows and was immediately reminded of the token related to the witchcraft and wizardry sect. That must be the token that Su Qin wanted, but Jian Wushuang did not immediately take it out. "Territorial Lord, you rightfully own everything that Zhong Hun left behind, since you're the one who killed him. However, the token is essential to my sister and me. We have to bring it back to our sect to complete our mission. We earnestly hope you can give it to us. We won't take it from you without compensation, of course. We'll give you something in return." After Su Qin finished speaking, he waved his hand, and 3 white elixir pills that exuded an alluring scent appeared in front of Jian Wushuang. "What are these?" Jian Wushuang looked at those 3 elixir pills with his sharply constricted pupils. Those 3 elixir pills contained a surging divine power that sparked Jian Wushuang's excitement. Their power was very pure, at least countless times purer than the primordial stone's divine power, which he used to improve his cultivation realm. "These are divine elixir pills. You should know about it." Su Qin smiled. Jian Wushuang was shaken up. He knew about the divine elixir pills, of course. It contained pure divine power, and was especially used by cultivators above the undying saint realm to restore their divine power. Under normal circumstances, an ordinary undying saint who had exhausted his divine power needed approximately 10 pills to completely recover his strength. In short, these elixir pills were useful even to an undying saint. The market price of a divine elixir pill was worth 5 million primordial stones. It was the accepted exchange price. However, one was only able to exchange divine elixir pills for primordial stones, as not many would be willing to do it the other way round. I'm only one step away from peak ultimate god realm. I wanted to rely on absorbing and refining primordial stones to make a breakthrough, but I've used up a huge amount of primordial stones and got the very minimal effect after spending a month in seclusion. If I want to make a breakthrough, I must find something with pure divine power than primordial stones. I'm sure the divine power contained in these elixir pills is countless times stronger than those contained in the primordial stones. These divine elixir pills came handy for me. Jian Wushuang was very excited upon looking at the 3 divine elixir pills before him, but he kept a straight expression. Master Su Qin, do you mean that you want to use these 3 divine elixir pills to exchange for that token? Jian Wushuang asked flatly. Yes, these 3 divine elixir pills will be yours as long as you are willing to give me the token. Su Qin smiled. I wonder why it's only worth 3 divine elixir pills if the token is so important for both of you. Jian Wushuang asked. Su Qin glanced at the red-clothed girl. Lu Sienna next to him before explaining, truthfully, the token is of no use to my junior sister or me, but it's beneficial to our sect. As for what it's used for, even junior sister, and I don't know anything about it, as our mission is only to bring it back to our sect. Is that so? Jian Wushuang raised his brows before asking, May I know which sect both of you come from? Where do I come from? What does it have to do with you? Lu Sienna, who had been quiet, finally let out a cold snort and glared coldly at Jian Wushuang. Junior sister. Su Qin reprimanded and switched to a gentle tone. Sorry, my junior sister is a little impatient. We received an order from our sect elders never to reveal the name of our sect unless we are in a critical life or death moment. We ask for your kind understanding, territorial lord. That's all right. Jian Wushuang waved his hand a few times, feeling quite embarrassed. After pondering for a while, Jian Wushuang kept the 3 divine elixir pills in front of him into the interspatial ring before taking out the special token. Masters, is this what you're looking for? Jian Wushuang asked. Su Qin looked at the token and instantly discharged his soul power. After a while, his face sank before cracking a smile. Indeed, this is the token. Thank you, territorial lord. I should be the one thanking both of you. Jian Wushuang smiled. My junior sister, and I shall leave now since we've gotten the token. Su Qin no longer lingered around. Have a safe trip. Jian Wushuang got up to send them away. After a while, Su Qin and Lu Sienna left the territorial lord mansion. Jian Wushuang finally let out a sigh of relief after watching the 2 of them left and completely disappeared from his sight. These 2 people are so weird. Jian Wushuang murmured. It was weird indeed. They were 2 powerful heaven ultimate gods, especially Su Qin. With their intimidating strength, those 2 people could easily force Jian Wushuang to hand over the token. Even if they chose not to be harsh, they should at least behave like a powerful expert. However, Su Qin was very kind to Jian Wushuang apart from the desolated look shown by Lu Sienna. Su Qin did not even have the air of a prideful person. Not only was he not harsh, but he also offered 3 divine elixir pills in exchange for the token. How easygoing! Su Qin seemed like an easygoing person with no temper at all. Jian Wushuang, who had experiences from his previous and present life, would not be so naive as to believe Su Qin was a kind person. Chapter 2597. Peak Ultimate God. Not only are they extremely polite to me, but they must also have an extraordinary background. Although they are reluctant to reveal their sect, they can produce 3 divine elixir pills at will with no sweat. Their background is indeed unusual. Jian Wushuang exclaimed. The 3 divine elixir pills were worth 15 million primordial stones. Such a large amount of wealth was substantial even to ordinary heaven ultimate gods from an impressive background. However, the 2 of them were unfazed. It was as though those 3 divine elixir pills were nothing to them. Someone so generous must be from a spectacular background. That token is useless to me anyway, and I'm not interested in figuring out the token's secrets as I've already made a lot of money in exchange for bagging those 3 divine elixir pills. Jian Wushuang smiled secretly. Those 3 divine elixir pills happened to be of great use to him at that time. Jian Wushuang immediately returned to the underground palace and began his seclusion once again. In the void, not far from the territorial lord mansion, Su Qin and Lu Xiener were walking side by side. "Senior brother, I don't understand. Why did you need to give him 3 divine elixir pills for the token? Although those 3 divine elixir pills are nothing to us, it's a waste for you to do that. I'm sure the territorial lord would have handed the token to you, nonetheless, even if you gave him nothing in return," said Lu Xiener. "This token is of no use to him, and will merely keep it in the interspatial ring. It's better to give it to us as a favor. But, junior sister, I told you before that the Northern Darkstar Territorial Lord is not someone to be trifled, since he's able to kill Zhong Hun." Su Qin smiled. "Why can't I see that he's extraordinary? I think he just got lucky. We're kind enough to not ask him for all the treasures left behind by Zhong Han, and instead only asked for the token." Lu Xiener pouted. Su Qin did not reply immediately. He stopped dead in his tracks at the void before raising his palm. There was a possessed golden beetle in the center of his palm. Some faint blood streaks pattern could be seen on the golden beetle's elytra. "Why did you bring Goldie out?" Lu Xiener glanced at the golden beetle confusingly and asked Su Qin, "Didn't you say that you can't tell if the Northern Darkstar Territorial Lord is extraordinary? Goldie could see it." Su Qin smiled before continuing, "You know, Goldie can recognize and distinguish various beings in the ancient god domain. There are many special ethnic groups and life forms in the ancient god domain, including human cultivators, each having different life ratings. No matter how the other party tries to stay under the radar, Goldie could easily sense the other party's life rating as long as it's nearby." Lu Xiener said, "Oh, really? Goldie is just next to the Northern Darkstar Territorial Lord. Could it sense he has an impressive life rating? Is he not just a human cultivator?" No, Goldie was unable to sense it. It was just right next to the Northern Darkstar Territorial Lord, yet it sensed nothing. "This was the reason I've said the Northern Darkstar Territorial Lord must be unusually powerful," explained Su Qin. Lu Xiener was startled. She knew of Goldie's ability. There were all kinds of special ethics and beings in the world. There were very few among them which Goldie was unable to sense their life rating. The 2 of them had never seen it happen. Could that Northern Darkstar Territorial Lord be a special being? Lu Xiener asked instinctively. "I don't know, and it's not convenient for us to ask him either. Anyways, we shouldn't look down upon someone like him. It's the reason I took out 3 divine elixir pills to exchange the token with him. I want him to be happy or even grateful to us. There might be a chance for us to grow closer if we have an opportunity to meet again in the future," said Su Qin with a smile. Those 3 divine elixir pills were nothing to them. It was certainly a good bargain to use them in exchange for a good relationship with someone having an impressive life rating. "Let's go. We've settled Zhong Han, and next is the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's matter," urged Su Qin. "That's not something urgent. I want to go explore around here since we are outside the sect," said Lu Xiener. Su Qin smiled and did not object to the idea as the 2 continued to walk around and soon disappeared into the void. In the underground palace, a thick divine power erupted from his body as Jian Wushuang sat cross-legged. "My divine power has reached the very limits of high-level ultimate God, and there's nothing more I can do to improve. I shall accumulate a huge gush of divine power and aim for a breakthrough." These 3 divine elixir pills. Jian Wushuang looked at the 3 divine elixir pills in front of him. Next, he grabbed one of the elixir pills and swallowed it. As soon as the divine elixir pill entered his body, It immediately turned into a vast divine power. The most important part was the extremely pure divine power within. Its divine power is 100 or even 1,000 times purer than the primordial stone's divine power. It's an entirely two different concepts. Jian Wushuang's eyes were glimmering with excitement. The pure divine power in his body slowly gathered in front of the heavy barrier. As long as he made a mental move, he could try to fire on the heavy barrier. Although the divine power in a single divine elixir pill was able to shake the barrier, I feel it's still lacking in power to completely smash the barrier, muttered Jian Wushuang before he immediately reached out, grabbed another divine elixir pill, and directly swallowed it. Another pill went into his body. The same vast and pure divine power emerged as it integrated with the earlier formed divine power. It's almost there. Let's start. Jian Wushuang's hands tensed up. In his body, the vast and pure divine power accumulated in front of the heavy barrier and instantly turned into a huge charging torrent. Boom, 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 boom. Several bombardments took place, which shook Jian Wushuang up with each collision. After more than a dozen bombardments, almost half of the pure divine power from both divine elixir pills were consumed, and a faint crack finally appeared on the heavy barrier. Jian Wushuang was ecstatic with the crack's appearance. Boom, boom. Two more extremely strong bombardments occurred. Finally, the heavy barrier was destroyed as his divine power soared. In just a few moments, his divine power and divine body were promoted to a new level. Finally, peak ultimate God. Jian Wushuang opened his eyes. There was a deep twinkle in his eyes, and a smile suddenly cracked on his face. Chapter 2598. Auction. Although it was merely a small cultivation realm breakthrough from the high-level ultimate God to peak ultimate God, with Jian Wushuang gaining little improvement in divine power and divine body, his strength had improved tremendously. After 10 years of meditation and enlightenment, my understanding of sword principle has allowed me to achieve merit level in sword world. I have also improved a fair bit in space-time law and transmigration law. I am now considered quite a capable Earth ultimate God. Now that my divine power has made a breakthrough, I might have become quite a formidable Earth ultimate God. I should be able to counter a weak heaven ultimate God's attacks in a duel if I ever encountered one by displaying my many secret techniques. Jian Wushuang smiled from being pleased with his progress. He had merely lived for less than 40 years in this current life, yet had reached the peak ultimate God realm. Anyone would be terrified if they knew. He was able to achieve such impressive progress because of his astounding divine power absorption and refinement speed. It should not be forgotten that he had also put in a great effort in improving his sword principle and understanding of laws. I've used only 2 of the 3 divine elixir pills. There is still one more. Jian Wushuang stretched out his hand and grabbed the last pill, but did not swallow it. Even if he swallowed it, he could only slightly increase his divine power, which had little effect on his combat prowess. A single divine elixir pill was worth 5 million primordial stones, which would prove to be quite a handsome sum for the star-picking pavilion's auction. After I made a breakthrough to the peak ultimate God realm, my needs for pure divine power have become greater. Divine powers from primordial stones are no longer useful to me from now on. If I want to improve my cultivation using my Bodhi's terrifying divine power refinement speed, I'll need to find ways of getting a lot of divine elixir pills. I'm afraid I need about 20 divine elixir pills to progress from a peak ultimate God to a primary level Earth ultimate God, murmured Jian Wushuang. 20 divine elixir pills would be equivalent to 100 million primordial stones. It was an astronomical figure even to ordinary heaven ultimate gods. Perhaps those who were extremely powerful or originated from an impressive background could produce such a huge amount of wealth, but it would not be easy. Jian Wushuang was lucky to have met Su Qin, who was willing to give away 3 divine elixir pills in exchange for the witchcraft and wizardry sex token. Otherwise, it would be very difficult for him to get hold of even a single divine elixir pill. It's impossible to get that many divine elixir pills now. I shall slowly figure something out, muttered Jian Wushuang before leaving the underground palace. Jian Wushuang summoned Xiao Tiexin and Songheng the moment he arrived at the hall. The Narcissus territory auction will start in a few months. I have a few items to be auctioned, so you'll need to head there in advance. Both of you will be in charge of Northern Darkstar Territories matters while I'm away, said Jian Wushuang. Yes. Songheng nodded. Master, do you want me to go with you? Xiao Tiexin asked. No, I can go alone. Jian Wushuang smiled. He left on that day itself. The Narcissus territory was quite far away from the Northern Darkstar territory and would take a long time for him to arrive at the destination. The auction might be over when he finally arrived. Nonetheless, there were wormholes around the Northern Darkstar territory. Through the wormholes, Jian Wushuang soon appeared in the Narcissus territory. Stellar regions differed in size. The Narcissus territory was much larger than the Northern Darkstar territory. A larger territory would produce more experts, resulting in more complicated forces controlling a territory. It was arduous for the Narcissus territorial lord to stabilize the situation within his stellar region. Therefore, the Narcissus territorial lord was much more powerful than the territorial lord from other stellar regions, with news stating the Narcissus territorial lord was a heaven ultimate god. Due to the Narcissus territory being one of the larger stellar regions in Danyang Holy Domain, the star-picking pavilion had chosen to hold the auction event there. In a magnificent and huge stone fort constructed entirely of red quicksand, the quicksand was flowing slowly like a river and breathing life into the stone fort. The star-picking pavilion was located exactly in that stone fort. Although it was only one of star-picking sub-pavilions in Danyang Holy Domain, its outlook was still magnificent and breathtaking. In front of the stone fort's gate, for tall and burly figures stood there motionless like sculptures, with their eyes occasionally scanning the passers-by or people walking out of the stone fort. Those 4 people were excusing the divine power breath of an ultimate god. The star-picking pavilion was indeed impressive that even their guards were ultimate gods. Draped in a golden robe, Jian Wushuang with a long sword on his back arrived at the magnificent red stone fort and did not deliberately constrain his divine power breath. He was exuding the divine power breath of a high-level earth ultimate god under the black stone's disguise. Is this the star-picking pavilion? Jian Wushuang raised his head and glanced at the towering red stone fort in front of him before walking into the fort without any hesitation. The 4 ultimate gods experts who were guarding the stone castle immediately locked their eyes on Jian Wushuang, but did not stop him from entering the stone fort. Jian Wushuang saw a huge hall as soon as he entered the stone fort. There were a large number of various cultivators in the hall, with many of them being ultimate gods. As soon as Jian Wushuang entered, his high-level earth ultimate god divine power breath became conspicuous. Instantly, a black chief from star-picking pavilion greeted Jian Wushuang in person. The black chief was also a genuine primary-level earth ultimate god. Master, a pleasure to have met you. You look unfamiliar. This must be the first time you're here in the star-picking pavilion's sub-pavilion of Narcissus territory. Are you an expert traveling alone, or a territorial lord of any stellar region? The Black Chief casually asked. Jian Wushuang did not reply, and brought out a token instead. The token represented the identity of a territorial lord with the names Northern Darkstar and Jian E on it. Oh, you're Jian E, the Northern Darkstar, territorial lord. The Black Chief smiled. Master, please come inside. Under the guidance of the Black Chief, Jian Wushuang arrived at a separate room. The room was under the protection of a restrictive shield, while the Black Chief stood humbly in front of Jian Wushuang. The Black Chief asked, Master, how can the Star-Picking Pavilion help you? I heard there will be a large-scale auction here soon. I want the Star-Picking Pavilion to help me put a few things up for auction. Is it possible? Jian Wushuang looked at the Black Chief and calmly said, Of course, but we do charge a small fee. What treasures are you putting up for auction? Asked the Black Chief. Chapter 2599. The price of the treasures. Jian Wushuang waved his hand and took out several treasures which he had prepared. The Black Chief peered at what was being displayed. The Black Chief first looked at the 4 jade slips. He scanned through them before smiling. Master, this is the first 4 volumes for the Divine Destructive Beast Cultivation Method. They are indeed valuable, but I'm afraid the effect won't be satisfactory if you put them up for auction. Why? Jian Wushuang asked. Firstly, this secret technique is quite unusual. Although it's extremely powerful, the prerequisite for cultivation is very high, hence not many people are interested in it. Secondly, the Star-Picking Pavilion has this cultivation method as well. These first 4 volumes you've got here probably comes from the Star-Picking Pavilion. Whoever got the cultivation method from us would have also received the cultivation insights. The cultivation insights are only made available to the first person who received the cultivation method. Master, the cultivation insights in these 4 volumes of yours were taken away from what I see. This greatly reduces the value of these 4 volumes. Even if there's an expert who's interested in these 4 volumes, they will want to get it directly from the Star-Picking Pavilion to receive the cultivation insights, even if it costs more. No one will be interested in buying these 4 volumes from you, said the Black Chief with a smile. Is that so? Jian Wushuang's face sank, as he never expected that. He knew the cultivation method was excellent and valuable. San Shouwang had been in the position of the Northern Darkstar territorial lord for so many years and had accumulated so much wealth across those years. However, more than 90% of his wealth was used in exchange for these 4 volumes. He had always thought these 4 volumes were of great value, but it was the opposite. Those 4 volumes' truly precious element was the cultivation insights contained therein. But those insights had been taken away by San Shouwang a long time ago. Noticing the changes in Jian Wushuang's expression, the Black Chief smiled and suggested, Master, are you willing to sell these 4 volumes to the Star-Picking Pavilion? We're willing to offer 2 million primordial stones for them. 2 million primordial stones. Jian Wushuang nodded slightly. Yes. The Black Chief smiled faintly. San Shouwang did pay quite a hefty sum to get those 4 volumes of the Divine Destruction Beast, but the value had dropped greatly after the cultivation insights were taken away. They were worth less than 2 million primordial stones. The Black Chief offered 2 million primordial stones for them to make a good impression because he saw the other treasures Jian Wushuang had taken out. The Black Chief looked at the other treasures again. This is a heavenly treasure offensive divine weapon, but unfortunately, its power is just average. The Black Chief glanced at the pair of black boxing gloves. The gloves were San Shaoseng's offensive divine weapon, which he left behind. The market price of an ordinary heavenly treasure offensive divine weapon is worth about 1 million primordial stones. The Star-Picking Pavilion will probably buy this at 900,000 primordial stones at most. If you sell this elsewhere to someone else who needs it, you might be able to dispose of it at around 1 million to 1,200,000 primordial stones. This spear is not bad. Although it's only a low-level heavenly treasure, its power is much stronger than those gloves with its menacing and cold spirit. The price is estimated to be very close to a high-level heavenly treasure offensive divine weapon. You might be able to sell it for over 2 million primordial stones in the auction. The Black Chief looked at the black spear. Both heavenly treasure and earthly treasure were divided into 3 levels: low level, ordinary level, and high level. San Shuang's gloves and Zhong Hun's black spear were just low-level heavenly treasure offensive divine weapons, hence their prices were not very high. However, the 2 remaining treasures which once belonged to Zhong Hun were quite extraordinary. One of them was a heavenly treasure defensive armor, and the other was the offensive divine soul weapon spiritual stone staff. The Black Chief's eyes constricted as he studied the 2 treasures. The Black Chief said even a heavenly ultimate god would be interested in getting a piece of heavenly treasure defensive armor. The armor you have here may be rather ordinary in terms of its power, but its value is still worth 10 times more than an offensive divine weapon of the same level. This armor may be worth 15 million primordial stones in the auction, and if you are lucky to meet someone in need of this, you may be able to get a good 20 million primordial stones. Oh, Jian Wushuang raised his brows but was not surprised. The body armor was worth 10 times more than an offensive divine weapon of the same rank. If Zhong Hun's black spear was worth 2 million primordial stones, there was hope for the defensive armor to be sold for 20 million primordial stones. I see. So that's how much a defensive armor could go for. In that case, the offensive divine soul weapon should be even more precious and rare compared to the defensive armor. Jian Wushuang's eyes had a glimmer of expectation. The Black Chief stared momentarily at the spiritual stone staff. This offensive divine soul weapon is extremely rare and also a piece of heavenly treasure. My goodness! The Black Chief was at best a primary-level Earth ultimate god, but he held quite a high position in the star-picking pavilion and had seen countless kinds of treasures. Most of the treasures, like the heavenly treasure defensive armor, failed to catch his interest. However, an offensive divine soul weapon was different. It was one of the rarest and most precious treasures. It was much rarer and precious than the defensive armor. The value of the spiritual stone staff must be extremely high, as it was a heavenly treasure. Master, this stone staff is very precious. I can't estimate its specific value, but am sure it's more than 50 million primordial stones. As for how much it's worth, we shall find out in the auction, said the Black Chief with a solemn expression. Master, please allow me to go and discuss with the supervisor if we can put this piece of offensive divine soul weapon as the first item to be auctioned. If the first thing to be auctioned is a heavenly treasure offensive divine soul weapon, it will set a very lively atmosphere at the auction. In addition, the price of the first treasure auctioned will usually be higher. If you are lucky, you might get 70 to 80 million primordial stones. The first item to be auctioned. Jian Wushuang nodded slightly before he asked, in a surprised tone, shouldn't something worth 70 to 80 million primordial stones is sold as a star product in the grand finale? Jian Wushuang knew that each auction would have a grand finale. The treasure in the grand finale round was the most precious and important piece of all the treasures auctioned. Generally, there would be more than one piece of treasure with an average of around 3 to 4 pieces. In Jian Wushuang's opinion, the spiritual stone staff was so valuable that it should qualify as a grand finale treasure. Chapter 2600, Young Palace Master of the Namu Palace. Master, the scale of the auction this time is much larger than before, and the treasures are a very high level. Among them are some very precious and rare treasures. Your heavenly treasure, offensive divine soul weapon, is indeed precious, but among all the other treasures up for auction, it's probably ranked in the top 10. It's still quite far off from being the grand finale item to be auctioned. Of course, it will qualify if it's a high-level heavenly treasure, offensive divine soul weapon, said the Black Chief. Jian Wushuang was dumbfounded. He had underestimated the auction scale. He thought that his heavenly treasure, offensive divine soul weapon, was very precious and rare. Surprisingly, it was only ranked in the top 10 among the many treasures up for auction. Let's make it the first treasure to be auctioned, if this is the case, agreed Jian Wushuang. Okay. The Black Chief nodded slightly. By the way, I still have some resources here. Can you please have a look at them and see how many primordial stones are they worth, so you'll have a rough idea. Jian Wushuang took out another interspatial ring. There were a lot of cultivation resources, along with a myriad of treasures in that interspatial ring. They were left behind by San Shouwang and Zhong Hun, and each was quite valuable. The Black Chief began to carefully scrutinize each of them. He raised his head after a while. Master, a rough estimation of your resources here should be around 12 million primordial stones. Jian Wushuang nodded slightly. He did a calculation with Xiao Tiexin before, and was told an almost similar figure. During the auction, I should be able to use these resources to pay if I want to buy any of the auctioned items, right? Jian Wushuang asked. Of course you can, said the Black Chief. That's fine. Jian Wushuang cracked a smile on his face. He had used up some of the primordial stones he received from Zhong Hun's interspatial ring. However, there were still approximately 6 million primordial stones. After adding in 2 million primordial stones from selling the Divine Destruction Beast Manual and the 10 million to 12 million primordial stones worth of resources, he would have about 20 million primordial stones in total. Apart from that, he still had a divine elixir pill that was equivalent to 5 million primordial stones. The 4 treasure pieces he put up for auction at the star-picking pavilion were worth a lot of primordial stones, especially the heavenly treasure defensive armor and the offensive divine soul weapon. If I add up all the primordial stones I could get after the auction, my total assets will be more than 100 million primordial stones. Jian Wushuang held his hands in confidence. 100 million primordial stones was truly an amazing amount. He wondered if it was enough for him to buy the stately painting. There's one more thing. Jian Wushuang looked at the Black Chief again. You knew him from the Northern Darkstar territory, and I haven't been the territorial lord for long. The previous territorial lord, San Shouwang, had handed over a unique treasure to the star-picking pavilion over the past few decades. It's an unusual picture scroll, and I heard ITLL be auctioned in this coming auction. Is this true? Picture scroll. The Black Chief looked surprised before slowly nodded. It's true indeed. When will the picture scroll be auctioned? How much will the price be like? Jian Wushuang asked. The Black Chief wore a strange look. Master, I'm sorry. The star-picking pavilion has a rule. There will be many treasures to be auctioned, but we are unable to release information about these treasures before the auction. As for the picture scroll you mentioned, I was able to affirm that ITLL be auctioned because you were able to tell me about the picture's origins. That's all I can say. Jian Wushuang was helpless. Master, this is your token. You'll have a box on the 2nd floor when the auction begins. If something happens during the auction, it'll also use the same token to send you a message. During this time, you may also choose to live in the star-picking pavilion, and I can arrange a secret chamber for you if you'd like. The Black Chief handed a token to Jian Wushuang. Yes, please. Jian Wushuang took the token and smiled faintly. He soon arrived at a secret chamber in the star-picking pavilion soon under the Black Chief's guidance. It's less than 4 months before the auction date. They'll just wait here during this time. Jian Wushuang took out the Fengtian scroll before closing his eyes and began to meditate. Time was passing by slowly. As the auction day got closer and closer, more and more experts from the other stellar regions arrived. In a flash, it was the day before the auction began. Star Picking Pavilion was brightly lit that night. Jian Wushuang continued to meditate in his secret chamber with his eyes closed when a soft knock suddenly sounded on the door. "What's the matter?" Jian Wushuang kept his eyes closed. "Master, the auction will officially begin tomorrow. Many territorial lords from various stellar regions, experts from various sects, and also some independent experts have now gathered in the Star-Picking Pavilion. We've invited all these experts to a grand banquet tonight so that everyone can get to know each other. Would you be interested in joining?" The Black Chief's voice came from outside the secret chamber. "Banquet? I got it." Jian Wushuang nodded slightly. The Black Chief immediately left. Jian Wushuang had also stood up and walked towards the banquet. It was a huge, noisy banquet with hundreds of experts participating in the banquet with more than a dozen of territorial lords among them. Jian Wushuang was also a territorial lord, but his identity was not sufficient to be a star of the banquet. There were many more people attending the banquet with much higher status and power than him. Jian Wushuang briefly glanced around. Among the hundreds of experts, he spotted more than 20 peak Earth ultimate gods, with the remaining being either primary level or high-level Earth ultimate gods. As for those who had the higher heaven ultimate god cultivation realm, there were only 6 people. Besides that, there were a few people around who were not particularly powerful, but had impressive backgrounds, especially the menacing-looking, crimson-haired young man who was sitting in the center of the banquet. The young man was just a peak Earth ultimate god, but the few heaven ultimate gods who sat around him dared not act arrogant and behaved humbly around him. They seemed to be quite fearful of him. From the conversations of the territorial lords around him, Jian Wushuang learned that the crimson-haired young man came from Nanwu Palace, and he was the young palace master of the Nanwu Palace. Nanwu Palace was one of the top 5 powerful sects in the entire Danyang Holy Domain. There was hearsay that Nanwu Palace had the capabilities to even challenge the Crimson Stone Fort. Chapter 26:01. The auction begins. Unexpectedly, even the young palace master of the Nanwu Palace is participating in the auction. It seems the treasures to be auctioned this time must be extraordinary, especially the last few grand finale treasures. I'm getting more and more curious, commented a sloppy old man while holding a cooked beast leg in his hand as he talked while eating with his greasy mouth. Although the sloppy old man was behaving rather ill-mannered, no one around dared to tell him off. The reason was that sloppy old man exuded a powerful high-level heaven ultimate god aura. His realm was quite close to peak heaven ultimate god. Even the young palace master of Nanwu Palace would not simply trifle with such a powerful person like him. Another heaven ultimate god asked, "Young palace master, I wonder what treasures in the auction attract you to come here in person?" The experts around were also curious. Although the auction scale was not small, it was not a top-tier auction when looking at the entire Danyang Holy Domain. Usually, an auction of such scales would be unable to attract the attention of Nanwu Palace. However, it was very surprising that not only did the Nanwu Palace participate, but had sent the young palace master to attend. The Nanwu Palace young palace master smiled evilly upon noticing the gazes on him, and said, "Everyone, don't get me wrong, as I'm only here because I happen to be nearby. The Star-Picking Pavilion did notify Nanwu Palace about this auction, and I was going to send a few heaven ultimate gods here, but I end up coming here myself since I'm in the vicinity. As for what treasures will be auctioned, You ought to know Star Picking Pavilion's rules. How will I know what's to be auctioned? Everyone around him nodded after hearing what he said. Indeed, they were aware of the Star Picking Pavilion's rules, where they would at most notify every great sect if there were precious treasures to be auctioned in the Danyang holy realm, despite never revealing said treasures. It was to add a little suspense to the auction event. If the treasures were something highly sought after by every great sect in Danyang holy domain at any costs, the Star-Picking Pavilion would of course have released some news in advance. Such was their deliberate act to build momentum and allow those great sects to prepare in advance so that the Star-Picking Pavilion can make a fortune out of the auction. For that particular auction, the Star-Picking Pavilion merely notified all the great sects without letting any information slip. It meant the treasures were enough to attract interest from those sects, but not enough to make them fight over it. Young Palace Master, I hear the Divine Demon Sect, Life and Death Tower, and Dongfang Clan are also attending this auction, but they aren't here at the banquet. The strange matter is that no one from the Crimson Stone Fort seems to be here, said a Heaven Ultimate God. The Divine Demon Sect, Life and Death Tower, and Dongfang Clan were some top-tier sects in the Danyang Holy Domain on par with Namwu Palace. However, Crimson Stone Fort was the one in charge of the Danyang Holy Domain. The Star-Picking Pavilion would have naturally also notified the other forces and sects since they had notified Namwu Palace. It's normal for them to send experts here today. As for Crimson Stone Fort, they are troubled with internal conflict and won't have time to participate in this auction. The Namwu Palace young palace master sneered and derided contemptuously without showing any respect for the Crimson Stone Fort. The current Crimson Stone Fort was no longer the same as when the Crimson Stone Saint was still alive. The Namwu Palace's young palace master was casually chatting with a few Heaven Ultimate Gods quite loudly and had no intentions to conceal their conversation. Although Jian Wushuang was sitting in a corner, he could hear them. Namwu Palace, Divine Demon Sect, Life and Death Tower, and Dongfang Clan. These Danyang Holy Domain's top-tier sects sent their experts. Even though they are here, they have no idea what treasures will be auctioned. Although the stately painting is a mysterious treasure, no one was able to refine nor open it, which has greatly reduced its price. The Star-Picking Pavilion also does not know what the stately painting is. Therefore, I think the treasure these top-tier sects are after isn't the stately painting, but another treasure. No matter what treasures they are fighting for, it has nothing to do with me. I hope that these people will not compete with me, as am determined to win the stately painting. Otherwise, Jian Wushuang's eyes were glaring coldly. He was not worried if those Heaven Ultimate Gods would compete with him based on fair financial resources competition to win the auction. However, Jian Wushuang was not confident if his financial resources could compete against those top-tier sects if their target was the stately painting. If he was unable to compete fairly, he would have to rely on other means. The banquet lasted for 2 full hours before everyone left. The night became quiet after that. Early in the next morning, the sky was bright with the large Star-Picking Pavilion already quite lively. The auction was set to begin soon. At the auction site, there was a huge display stage under the covers of a powerful restrictive shield. The restrictive shield was set up by Star-Picking Pavilion at a hefty expense, such that it would not be shaken the slightest bit even if a Heaven Ultimate God were to attack it. There were also many Star-Picking Pavilion experts guarding around the restrictive shield to ensure the treasures displayed on the display stage were safe. The area 100 feet away from the display stage was densely packed by large numbers of people, with no less than 100,000 people could be seen at a glance. The crowd of more than 100,000 people was not to be underestimated, as the Star-Picking Pavilion had deliberately raised the bar of attendees invited. Those who were eligible to participate in the auction were either experts above the ultimate god realm or cultivators from a wealthy background who owned at least more than 100,000 primordial stones. As such, only around 100,000 cultivators were allowed entry into the auction site. The auction site consists of 3 floors. The first floor was the common floor where around 10,000 cultivators gathered. The second floor had over 100 rooms protected by a restrictive shield to prevent soul power from peeking into the rooms. Those who were able to get a room on the second floor must be at the Earth's ultimate god realm, which includes territorial lords of the various stellar regions, experts from some powerful sects, and even some independent experts. Jian Wushuang was staying in one of those rooms and could see the display stage below clearly through the window. However, none would be able to spot him. The last third level was even more impressive, as only heaven ultimate gods or experts from the impressive background were allowed there. Those heaven ultimate gods who appeared at the banquet the night before were only a small portion who attended the auction, with their numbers totaling in the dozens. Chapter 2602. The first piece of treasure in a room on the second floor of the auction site. Jian Wushuang stood alone while looking down below. This room is pretty good. No matter what treasures I buy from this room, no one would know who I am. I don't need to be afraid of being targeted, murmured Jian Wushuang. In the center of the display stage came a figure in a golden robe. Golden robe? Is this the star-picking pavilion golden chief? Jian Wushuang's eyes went narrow. The weakest among the star-picking pavilion golden chief was a peak Earth ultimate god. The stronger ones were heaven ultimate gods. The one who appeared on the display stage was a heaven ultimate god. San Shouwang did say that he has an older brother who's the star-picking pavilion golden chief before passed away. I wonder if it's true. Jian Wushuang frowned slightly. San Shouwang did mention he had an older brother who was the star-picking pavilion golden chief before his death. It could be a possibility it was an empty threat toward Jian Wushuang for him to escape death. Regardless, Jian Wushuang felt it would be best to stay on guard nonetheless. Therefore, Jian Wushuang was wary when he saw the star-picking pavilion golden chief. "Everyone!" The star-picking pavilion golden chief called out in a thick and magnificent voice. His voice spread out along with his heaven ultimate god divine power, which echoed vigorously throughout the auction site. This huge auction site instantly fell into silence, with everyone having their eyes on the star-picking pavilion golden chief. The golden chief cleared his throat before saying, "I would like to welcome all of you for participating in our star-picking pavilions auction. Although this auction isn't considered a top-tier auction in Danyang Holy Domain, the level of treasures auctioned are still reasonably high and won't disappoint you. Without further ado, let's begin the auction now. Let's start with the first treasure. Please have a look." The golden chief announced loudly. An old gray stone staff appeared on the display stage with a wave of his hand. The old gray stone staff was exuding a vast aura of soul power. That was Jian Wushuang's spiritual stone staff. As soon as the spiritual stone staff appeared, it immediately attracted everyone's attention. Is this a treasure related to soul power? Yes. It's an offensive divine soul weapon, which has reached the heavenly treasure level based on its power. Oh my God! The first treasure to be auctioned is a heavenly treasure offensive divine soul weapon. There was an uproar from the crowd as everyone's eyes instantly lit up. The offensive divine soul weapon heavenly treasure was rarely used in real battles because not many people were good at soul attacks. It was something useless for them, even if they managed to bid for it anyway, but they were still cheering excitedly. The reason behind those cheers was due to how precious and rare that treasure was. If the first treasure to be auctioned was already so valuable, the other upcoming treasures must be of similar qualities. Everyone was looking forward to the auction's upcoming treasures. The auction of the spiritual stone staff must be carried out at the same time, of course. The Golden Chief Grandiosity said, "Spiritual stone staff, a heavenly treasure, offensive divine soul weapon." I don't have to explain further about how precious it is. Let's start with the auction with the starting bid of 10 million primordial stones. The shocking amount of 10 million primordial stones was only the starting bid. However, everyone present was also aware the starting bid of 10 million primordial stones was not expensive at all for an offensive divine, soul, weapon, heavenly treasure. There were people instantly rushing to bid. 15 million primordial stones. 18 million. 23 million. The following incoming bids quickly rose the spiritual stone staff's price to 35 million primordial stones, and it was still going up frantically. The bidders were experts who stayed in the second and third floor rooms. The bids coming from the second floor were not many, with most of them being the heaven ultimate gods who were fighting neck to neck on the third floor. At that moment, there were 5 people gathered in a room on the third floor. Among the 5 were 4 heaven ultimate gods, with the weakest person being a beautiful woman. The beautiful woman's strength was weak and pitiful in comparison to the 4 heaven ultimate gods, since she was only a primary level earth ultimate god. However, it was that weaker beautiful woman who sat leisurely in this room, whereas the 4 heaven ultimate gods stood respectfully behind her. It was obvious that the beautiful woman had a great background. The first treasure to be auctioned is a heavenly treasure, offensive divine soul weapon. I can see that Star-Picking Pavilion is quite serious in their game. I was initially not very interested in this auction, but now I'm a little keen. The beautiful woman smiled lightly, and she eyed the spiritual stone staff again. 100 million. Those were simple words that emerged from the beautiful woman's lips. However, everyone in the room and those who were on the auction site heard her. The noisy auction site was silent once again. Many people were wide-eyed with horror. Even the experts from the second and third floor rooms who were still competing for the spiritual stone staff earlier went silent. 100 million. The bidding price had just risen to 40 million primordial stones, but it quickly became 100 million primordial stones. Who would dare to call after that bidding price? It must be from the Dongfang clan, judging from the room's voice, right? I guess only they have such courage. They sure are filthy rich. The heavenly treasure, offensive divine soul weapon, is something rare. I finally saw it, and I tried to bring it back, but I can't fight against her, since someone from the Dongfang clan has raised the bid. After a moment of hesitation, the experts in those rooms gave up the bidding. No way. Firstly, the bid was too high at 100 million primordial stones, which would make it the highest price ever paid for a heavenly treasure, offensive divine soul weapon. In most people's opinion, the spiritual stone staff might not even worth 100 million primordial stones. Secondly, the one who bid. There were many experts around, but only a few dared to compete with her. The auction of the spiritual stone staff was soon over, with its final price being 100 million primordial stones. The beautiful woman in the third floor room had won the bid. After concluding the bid, the beautiful woman glanced at an old man in purple in front of her and said, "Elder Shui, you are quite accomplished in soul attacks. Unfortunately, you have been unable to maximize the soul attacks effect due to a lack of suitable offensive divine soul weapons. I'll leave the spiritual stone staff with you and hope that you can use it well. Thank you, Mississippi." The old man dressed in purple was so excited and quickly thanked the woman. The beautiful woman waved her hand like she did not care at all. 100 million primordial stones were nothing to her. Chapter 2603, Transmigration Sword Formation, 100 million. Even for Jian Wushuang, hearing the final transaction price of the spiritual stone staff made his heart tremble. At that point, primordial stones were not much use for his cultivation, and neither had he ever paid much attention to his financial foundations. However, he truly needed a huge amount of primordial stones to purchase the stately painting at that moment, and would have been happy if the spiritual stone staff was sold for 80 million. However, it was sold for 100 million in the end. His confidence was boosted with that 100 million. I wonder who's the person in that room being so generous with her spending. Jian Wushuang could not help but look at the room where the final offer was made. Unfortunately, his spiritual power could not penetrate due to the restrictive shield. Naturally, he could not tell who that person was, but was probably a woman from that person's voice. The auction continued. Treasures after treasures were presented on the display shelf. Although those treasures were not remotely as valuable as the spiritual stone staff, they were far from cheap. For example, the heavenly treasure offensive divine weapons were very rare in any stellar regions, but they appeared quite often in the auction. Huge amounts of various treasure types were displayed before the crowd, with most of them being more valuable than regular heavenly treasure offensive divine weapons. The many experts taking part in the auction were competing enthusiastically, trying to purchase those treasures. Whenever an extremely valuable treasure appeared, it would cause a small stir in the auction. In the blink of an eye, the auction had already gone on for a full day. Within one day, a few hundred pieces of valuable treasures were being individually sold. Among the 4 treasures which Jian Wushuang put up at the star-picking pavilion, the boxing gloves and pitch-black spear, were sold one after another besides the spiritual stone staff. Among them, the final price for San Shuang's boxing gloves amounted to 1,150,000, while the pitch-black spear was sold for 2,050,000, more or less as predicted by the Black Chief. At that point, Jian Wushuang only had the heavenly treasure defensive armor yet to be sold. On the display stage, the Golden Chief waved his hand again, and a jade slip immediately appeared then. An extremely powerful sword essence shrouded the jade slip. Anyone could tell with a glance that it was not an ordinary item. Jade slip? Is that some secret technique? Everyone's attention in the auction was attracted by it. Jade slips were usually used to record information on secret techniques, secret literature, and various methods. Ladies and gentlemen, the next item is a sword formation. The Golden Chief's loud voice resonated within the auction house. The name of the formation is called Transmigration Sword Formation. It can only be studied by those who are highly skilled in sword principles and proficient in transmigration law. Transmigration sword formation. Almost everyone in the room felt doubtful. Even the individual room's experts on the 2nd and 3rd floor felt a little lost. They had not heard of the transmigration sword formation. However, in an individual room on the 3rd floor, the beautiful lattice pupils contracted. Transmigration sword formation? Might it be the sword formation created by that man? That man! The 4 heavenly ultimate gods standing behind her looked puzzling at each other. They had no idea who she was referring to. On the display stage, the Golden Chief took in everyone's facial expression and laughed. Perhaps you haven't heard of the Transmigration Sword Formation. If that's the case, let me explain in detail. The Transmigration Sword Formation was the creation of a sword expert who studied transmigration law from many ages ago. His name was Tong Xian, and most called him Tong Xian Saint, but some called him Sword Lord Tong Xian. He was someone who had pushed the sword principles to the extreme 3rd stage. In other words, he was a terrifying sword expert. As soon as he made the introduction, there was a wave of exclamations within the auction. The exclamation was not due to the fact the creator of the Transmigration Sword Formation was an undying saint, but due to the creator's capability to be known as Sword Lord Tong Xian. he managed to push his sword principles to the extreme third stage. Sword principles knowledge was vast and deep, and the level of understanding could roughly fit into 3 different stages. The first stage, Sword World. The second stage, Infinity Sword Tree. The third stage, Formation of All Things. Each stage was a lot complicated than the previous and more difficult to achieve as well. Take Purple Blood Saint, for example, who Jian Wushuang knew. He was an undying saint who was highly skilled in sword principles and extremely powerful. However, he had only reached the second stage of the Infinity Sword Tree despite being so. Moreover, he was still very far from the third stage. However, Sword Lord Tong Xian, who created the Transmigration Sword Formation, had understood the extreme third stage of sword principles, Formation of All Things. How could one fathom his greatness? It was no wonder people called him a Sword Lord. Compared to the Purple Blood Saint, he was really very far ahead. The Golden Chief continued. Sword Lord Tong Xin's level was only slightly below the peak of Undying Saint. However, he managed to roam the ancient god domain by relying on his sword skills and transmigration sword techniques. He was almost invincible among the Undying Saint beyond the third heaven. His words had caused a huge stir in the auction. Invincible among Undying Saints. Sword Lord Tong Xian, was that amazing? Although it's only beyond the third heaven, it was already very impressive. Sword Lord Tong Xian was a true super expert, an almost invincible existence among Undying Saints. The most powerful sword formation that he relied on is those eyes that were looking at the Transmigration Sword Formation began to burn with extreme desire. However, many were keeping themselves level-headed, especially those second and third floor experts in individual rooms. A voice from a third floor individual room immediately spoke. I've learned about Sword Lord Tong Xin's reputation in ancient literature. Although it was something that happened a few million years ago, he truly had such capabilities. However, the Star-Picking Pavilion would never put it on this auction if it's truly the Sword Lord Tong Xin's creation. Don't you think? Even if you will, it's unlikely to appear in an auction of this level. Instead, it will be featured in a much larger scale auction. Perhaps one that's well attended by Undying Saints, so that they can compete for it. The crowd began to agree. One had to have the capabilities of an ultimate god, or came from a prominent background to attend that auction. Therefore, none of them were idiots. The most powerful sword formation created by an almost invincible Undying Saint appearing in an auction only attended by ultimate gods. It was not even the star item of the auction. Was that a joke? As expected, the Golden Chief laughed. Chapter 2604. The first 4 stages, ladies and gentlemen, that's an accurate guess. If this Transmigration Sword Formation is really that valuable, it won't be presented in this auction. However, this sword formation truly originated from Sword Lord Tong Xian. The Golden Chief's huge voice resonated in the auction house. The reason it appears in this auction is due to its incompleteness. Sword Lord Tong Xian was extraordinarily talented. After he created the Transmigration Sword Formation, he gradually perfected it. It kept improving following the continuous progress in his understanding of transmigration law and sword principles. The Transmigration Sword Formation started with only 1 stage, but ended with a total of 12 stages. In other words, the Transmigration Sword Formation has a total of sword formation 12 stages, and are separated into the first 4, middle 4, and final 4 stages. Among them, the first 4 stages were extremely powerful, but also widely circulated. The middle stages are overpowering, but there were fewer of them being circulated. As for the final 4 stages, they are the real assets that Sword Lord Tong Xian relied on to roam the ancient god domain. The sword formation's final 4 stages alone were enough to cause a crazy competition among undying saints to obtain them. The middle 4 stages were also drooled over by countless heavenly ultimate gods, grand ultimate gods, and undying saints. However, what we have here today are only the first 4 stages of the transmigration sword formation. These 4 stages of the sword formation are the most widely circulated, hence its value is a lot less ridiculous compared to the remaining stages. The many experts in the auction finally understood the situation upon hearing the Golden Chief's explanation. So it's only the first 4 stages. No wonder it appears in this auction. According to the Golden Chief, Sword Lord Tongzin's transmigration sword formation is absolutely terrifying, but only the middle 4 and final 4 stages are the terrifying ones. As for these first 4 stages, they don't seem as powerful. Even so, they're created by Sword Lord Tong Xian after all. Even if it's the first 4 stages, I'm afraid it's still out of the ordinary. Unfortunately, although I'm skilled in sword principles, I've never studied transmigration law. Otherwise, I will try to purchase this sword formation. Many experts began to quietly discuss among themselves. On the display stage, the Golden Chief spoke once again. Honorable guests, I've been very clear with my explanation. I'll leave it up to you in deciding on the value of these transmigration sword formations' first 4 stages. We will now begin the auction with the starting bid of 10 million primordial stones. 10 million! There was a wave of exclamation in the venue, but it died down rather quickly. Even though it was just the transmigration sword formation's first 4 stages, its value was still extraordinary. There were people immediately making their bids. In the individual room on the 2nd floor, Jian Wushuang stood there with his eyes staring firmly at the jade slip on the display shelf. Transmigration sword formation. The main criteria being skilled in sword principles, and the secondary criteria are proficiency in transmigration law. This transmigration sword formation turns out to be very fitting to me, since I'm highly skilled in sword principles and also studied transmigration law. Jian Wushuang squinted. He was no stranger to sword formations. In his past life, he had more than one encounter with sword formations, so he understood its power. Hongjun Golden Sword Technique, for example, was similar to a sword formation. In his past life, it was one of his main techniques. He would usually activate the Hongjun Golden Sword to suppress his opponent while fighting his opponent in close-range combat. It gave his opponents extreme pressure when both were combined. The transmigration sword formation was the almost invincible sword Lord Tongzin's creation, which at the undying saint realm, with its power naturally not to be underestimated. If he could obtain such a sword formation, it would perhaps be a great help to him. I'm concurrently studying both space-time and transmigration laws. However, I can't simply utilize both laws simultaneously when I'm fighting experts. I could either activate space-time law and use space-time sword technique, or activate transmigration law and use transmigration sword technique. I could only activate one after another, but I can't perfectly join them together. But if I can handle this sword formation, then I can use transmigration law to drive the sword formation against my opponent while activating space-time law to fight him head-to-head. The power of both laws will then fuse perfectly and be unleashed simultaneously. Furthermore, the sword formation is for range attacks, and my sword technique is for melee combat. Both can then come together perfectly. Furthermore, I'll be able to take a brief rest from advancing transmigration sword skills and pour all my efforts into improving the space-time sword skills with this sword formation. I won't need to use the transmigration sword formation anymore once I've deepened my sword principle understanding, and at that time I'll just resume advancing my transmigration sword skills. Jian Wushuang held his hands together tightly as his eyes shone with excitement. He repeatedly contemplated and consistently felt the transmigration sword formation was very befitting for him. Although it would not immensely help to upgrade his overall battle strength, it could help to perfect his attack methods, making them more harmonious. That was a great advantage. Let's do it. Jian Wushuang made his decision. 20 million primordial stones. Jian Wushuang projected his voice from the room, which resonated throughout the entire auction house. As soon as the bid was made, the auction house became quiet for a short while. After that, a hoarse voice spoke from another room on the second floor. 25 million primordial stones. It'll be taking this sword formation. 30 million. Jian Wushuang did not hesitate to make his bid. A short, dark, hunching old man frowned in the individual room the hoarse voice came from. He looked over at Jian Wushuang's room with a cold light shining through his eyes. Unfortunately, although he knew which room the voice came from, he would not know who was in the room. 25 million primordial stones. Chan Tua hopes you can save me some face, said the ugly old man once again. Chan Tua? It's him. So, it's that old toad. No wonder he's interested in the transmigration sword formation, but am curious about his competitor's identity. That old toad is a peak Earth ultimate god, and has countless techniques. Not one to be trifled with. Many Earth ultimate gods in the second floor rooms were secretly exclaiming. All of them had heard of Chan Tua's reputation. He was very strong in both abilities and techniques, and at the same time was an eccentric lone wolf. However, it was exactly a lone wolf like him who only played by his own rule that was most terrifying. At least, not many would dare cross him among the many Earth ultimate gods on the second floor. The reason he revealed his identity was to ask Jian Wushuang to give him some face. Unfortunately, Jian Wushuang had no clue who Chan Tua was, and would not have cared even if he knew. 40 million primordial stones. Jian Wushuang had spoken once again. Chapter 2605. Golden Rock, damn you! Chan Tua, the ugly old man, cursed under his breath while staring toward Jian Wushuang's room with thick killing intent. However, he finally withdrew his killing intent, sighed lightly, and no longer followed up with another bid. The Earth ultimate gods in the individual rooms were disbelieved upon seeing Chan Tua's not reacting for a while. Looks like that old toad has given up. Ha! 40 million primordial stones? Even an ordinary heavenly ultimate god will have to liquidate all of his possessions to come up with that sum. The old toad does have some skills, but I'm afraid he won't be able to pay that much. I wonder who's the man in that room that even refuses to give Chan Tua face. He's probably someone important since he can come up with 40 million primordial stones just like that. The Transmigration Sword Formations auction ended amid praises and exclamations. Finally, the Transmigration Sword Formation's first 4 stages were purchased by Jian Wushuang with a bid of 40 million primordial stones. Jian Wushuang sighed in relief upon the successful purchase. 40 million primordial stones was the limit for him. If the bid went up further, he would perhaps have to give up. It was not from him being unable to afford more primordial stones, but because there were other items that he wanted to purchase later in the auction. Although the Transmigration Sword Formation was powerful, the value of even all 12 stages was not a 1,000th of the stately painting which Jian Wushuang wanted to truly obtain. As for the Transmigration Sword Formation, it was only something he discovered by chance and thought would be useful, hence his bid and purchase. This Chan Tua, who wanted to compete with me over the Transmigration Sword Formation. Although I've never heard of him, for someone who so daringly reveals their identity and asks me to give them some face must be pretty famous and most probably powerful too. I'm afraid I've offended him by not giving him any face, but the individual rooms in the auction are all under the protection of restrictive shields, so he won't know who I am. Even if he wanted to take revenge, he won't be able to find me. Jian Wushuang chuckled. The next valuable item was very soon placed on the display stage. Meanwhile, a bald man sat lazily in an individual room on the third floor. The bald man was clad in a golden robe, just like the golden chief downstairs, hosting the auction on the display stage. He was also a golden chief at the star-picking pavilion. 40 million primordial stones for the sword formation's first 4 stages. The bald man looked downward at the room where Jian Wushuang was in and asked, "Not many earthly ultimate gods will be able to afford 40 million primordial stones. Who's in that room?" 4 black chiefs were standing respectfully before the bald man. One of them immediately answered, "In reply to your question, Your Excellency, the man in the room is the Northern Darkstar Territorial Lord, Jian Yi." Jian Yi. The bald man raised his eyebrows. "He's the one who killed Sen Shouwang and took over the Northern Darkstar Territorial Lord position? Based on what I know, although Sen Shouwang was the Territorial Lord, the wealth he accumulated through the ages was completely spent on the Divine Destruction Beast. This man just became the Territorial Lord. Where did he find those primordial stones?" "Your Excellency, this Northern Darkstar Territorial Lord has also brought a few treasures to be auctioned in the star-picking pavilion. Among them was a heavenly treasure defensive armor and the heavenly treasure offensive divine soul weapon, which was also the first treasure that we sold in the auction," said the Black Chief. "What?" The bald man's eyes were shining with a strange light from being surprised. "He's only an ordinary territorial lord at the earthly ultimate god realm, yet he could obtain an offensive divine soul weapon and a defensive armor at the heavenly treasure rank. Looks like I really should request to meet him once. Sen Shouwang was someone who owed me a total of 6 million primordial stones after all, and said he will find ways to annihilate one of the large clans in the Northern Darkstar territory as soon as possible before returning the primordial stones to me, interest included, who will have thought he'd die in Jian Yi's hands. Even though he died, I can't just let go of my 6 million primordial stones." The bald man mumbled. Suddenly, the door opened as a black chief hurriedly came in. "What's with the hastiness?" The bald man frowned and scolded. "Your Excellency, the manager needs you to rush over as soon as you can." That gentleman is here," said the Black Chief fearfully. "What gentleman?" "Who?" The bald man was puzzled. "As Senior Meng," said the Black Chief nervously. The bald man stood in shock. In the next moment, he rushed out at full speed. The auction continued. Treasures after treasures were being displayed, with the many experts in the auction also fiercely trying to outbid each other. Half a day had passed in the blink of an eye. In that time, Jian Wushuang's last treasure, the heavenly treasure defensive armor, was also sold. The final bid was at 18 million primordial stones, slightly less than Jian Wushuang's initial prediction of 20 million primordial stones. The main reason was the too many very expensive treasures being sold in the auction. There were already 2 heavenly treasure armors among defensive armors so far in the auction, and Jian Wushuang's armor was the 3rd. Naturally, it was very difficult to sell it at a satisfactory price. Honorable guests, the next item we're about to present to you is rather unique. Behold. The Golden Chief waved his hand as a baby fist-sized golden rock appeared on the display stage. Everyone in the room immediately looked over and was puzzled as soon as they saw it. They could not identify the golden rock. They were not even sure if the golden rock was some special kind of crystal or merely an ordinary rock. The golden rock projected no special energy from its surface either. It was too ordinary. It was almost no different than normal rocks. The Golden Chief directly spoke. "Honorable guests, this golden rock is very unique. I'm assuming that nobody in the room could identify it, but you aren't the only one. Even we from the star-picking pavilion can't find out what exactly the material is. We don't know what's so special about it, and neither can we even be sure if it's really a treasure. Even the star-picking pavilion isn't sure. Everyone in the auction was shocked. Why will the star-picking pavilion put it up in the auction when they can't even ascertain if it's a valuable item? Honorable guests, please let me explain. Indeed, the star-picking pavilion can identify it, but the golden rock itself has an extraordinary origin. The Golden Chief began to narrate his story. Chapter 2606, Space-Time Fluctuation. Long time ago, a chamber left behind by an undying saint was discovered in a holy domain. The chamber contained large amounts of treasures left behind by the undying saint, and caused a wave of battle with many experts dying over the fight for those treasures. There were experts from Star-Picking Pavilion who participated in the battle and obtained quite a harvest, bringing back many treasures. This golden rock is one of the treasures we obtained from that chamber. The Golden Chief paused a little and scanned the crowd. Just imagine, if it's not a rare treasure, why will it appear in an undying saint's chamber, and why will he keep it with him the whole time? Besides, we had experts who tried destroying the golden rock, but there was no way to do so, as it's tough. That further proved it's truly a treasure that only nobody could identify and discover its value yet. The experts were nodding upon hearing the Golden Chief's words. Truly, anything appearing in an undying saint's chamber should not be ordinary. Furthermore, it was only logical that it was not a normal rock, since the golden rock was so tough. Sir, your words do make sense. Perhaps the golden rock is really a valuable item. However, we don't know its usage, so even if one of us obtained it, it won't be useful after all. A voice had spoken from an individual room on the second floor. The Golden Chief immediately laughed. That's truly the case. Hence, I have no confidence whether this item would be purchased. However, I will temporarily retract the restrictive shield around the display stage when the bidding starts, so that all of you can channel your soul power and investigate this golden rock. There are many experts here. Perhaps one of you could identify the golden rock. Besides, this golden rock's starting price isn't that high. It's only 5 million primordial stones. As soon as the Golden Chief finished his speech, he retracted the restrictive shield around him. Beams of soul power immediately began to push toward the golden rock. The experts in the auction, including those in the individual rooms of the second and third floors, paid their full attention to the golden rock. Jian Wushuang was also channeling his soul power toward it. A long while later, everyone began retracting their soul power. However, the experts in the auction felt perplexed after their investigation. None of them could find out anything about the golden rock, and everyone could only conclude that it was only an ordinary rock. Even the experts in the individual rooms of the second and third floors had the same opinion. This golden rock seems to be quite ordinary. In the Dongfang clan's room, the beautiful lattice expression was cold. She looked down and said, "I'm afraid Star-Picking Pavilion has obtained this golden rock for ages, but they could not find out anything about it, so they took it out for auction. If they can't tell what it is, this golden rock won't be of any use to me." The beautiful lady had no intention whatsoever to bid for it. Although the Dongfang clan was extremely wealthy, they would only spend their energy on things that were useful to them. Therefore, that golden rock was useless to them. It's just a rock that came from an undying saint's chamber, and yet the starting price is 5 million primordial stones. Star-Picking Pavilion truly has a big appetite, scoffed the young palace master of Nanwu Palace. He could not even be bothered to even look at the golden rock. Moreover, there were only a few items that had caught his attention for more than 2 seconds ever since the auction began. Even those were not sufficient to motivate him in placing a bid. Not only the 2 of them, but almost every expert in the auction house also did not show any interest in the golden rock. Due to that, nobody made a bid for a long time after the auction of the golden rock started. Silence filled the auction. After a long moment, a voice had spoken. "I'll pay the 5 million primordial stones since nobody is interested. I will investigate it in detail when I bring it home. Perhaps he'll find out the secrets within." Everybody followed the source of the voice and looked up at an individual room on the second floor. The person in that room must be the one who bought the Transmigration Sword formation. I wonder who's in that room. He spent 40 million primordial stones on the Transmigration Sword formation's first 4 stages, and now he's buying this unidentified rock with 5 million primordial stones. 5 million primordial stones is no small number after all. He may have found out something about it, since he's willing to pay so much for this golden rock. Many cultivators on the first floor began to discuss among themselves. In his room, Jian Wushuang spoke with a casual, emotionless voice. However, his eyes were staring at the golden rock on the display stage sharply at that moment. Jian Wushuang had extended his soul power as well when the Golden Chief took down the restrictive shield a moment ago and allowed everyone to penetrate the golden rock with their soul power. After his soul power shrouded the golden rock, he could sense an extremely hidden space-time fluctuation. The little bit of space-time fluctuation was so hidden that ordinary cultivators, even heavenly ultimate gods, grand ultimate gods, and undying saints could not easily discover it. The reason Jian Wushuang could discover it was not only because he had a very deep understanding of space-time law. The most crucial reason was that he had a great affinity with space-time energy. In other words, he had an extraordinary talent in understanding space-time law. He was a super genius in understanding space-time law, a super demon. It was due to that he could barely feel the slight space-time fluctuation and was willing to spend 5 million primordial stones to purchase the golden rock. This golden rock is probably a treasure that has something to do with space-time law, or maybe contains something that involves space-time law. Although I can't figure out its antecedents and what it contains, it only costs 5 million. It's a good gamble to bring it home and properly study it. I'm in luck if it ended up containing some big opportunity that involves space-time. Even if there aren't any big opportunities and is only an ordinary treasure that has something to do with space-time, my loss is still minimal, though Jian Wushuang to himself. The golden rock was too unique with nobody knowing about its origin. Even though Jian Wushuang could barely sense some space-time fluctuation, spending 5 million primordial stones was still a huge risk for him. As for the others, they could not even sense the little bit of space-time fluctuation. Naturally, they would not compete with him over it. Without a doubt, no one was willing to make a bid except for Jian Wushuang. In the end, the golden rock was sold for 5 million primordial stones and became Jian Wushuang's possession. Chapter 2607. Stars of the auction in the individual room. Sir, here are the first 4 stages of the Transmigration Sword formation, the golden rock, and also the primordial stones for the items you've sold after deducting our commission. It's all here, please check carefully. A black chief passed an interspatial ring to Jian Wushuang. After Jian Wushuang took the ring, he took a quick look and nodded slightly. The items he had sold in Star Picking Pavilion, including the spiritual stone staff, had made him a total of 12,120,000 primordial stones. There were close to 75 million primordial stones in the interspatial ring after deducting the 45 million primordial stones for the 4 stages of sword formation, the golden rock, and commissions paid. He was also in possession of a divine elixir pill and various cultivation materials that amounted to 25 million primordial stones. In other words, Jian Wushuang had exactly 100 million primordial stones. I'm hoping that the 100 million primordial stones is enough to help me purchase the stately painting, mumbled Jian Wushuang to himself. The auction continued. However, the items that were displayed thereafter did not motivate Jian Wushuang to bid despite there were quite many valuable ones that caught the heavenly ultimate god's attention who competed for them. Time flew by, and the auction had gone on for a full 3 days. Many treasures had been sold in those 3 days, but the enthusiasm of those experts taking part in the auction did not even decrease. However, Jian Wushuang began to feel uneasy as time went by. It's been 3 days, but the stately painting's bidding still hasn't started. Could it be? Jian Wushuang thought of a possibility that made him feel very uneasy. At that moment, the Golden Chief cleared his throat on the display stage and spoke with his incredibly resonant voice. Honored guests, this auction has come to its finale. The next items are the 3 star treasures of this auction. His words immediately lit up the enthusiasm in the house. Many experts had their eyes burning with desire. Stars of the auction, it's finally starting. The 3 most valuable items featured are finally going to be auctioned. Thanks. I wonder what are the differences between these 3 items. The experts were incredibly curious. Even heavenly ultimate gods on the 3rd floor. The experts from Nanwu Palace, Divine Demon Sect, Life and Death Tower, and Dongfang Clan evidently became very serious before straightening their sitting posture. Usual treasures could hardly catch the attention of those top powers of the Danyang Holy Domain. As an example, very few of the many treasures being auctioned earlier could spark their interests and make them bid for it. However, the last 3 items were a different story. The 3 stars of the auction even sparked some curiosity in them. Contrary to the general emotions, Jian Wushuang sat in the individual room with a terribly gloomy face. What I fear most has happened. Jian Wushuang clenched his fists as his gaze turned frosty. Earlier on, he caught words from the Black Chief that the stately painting would be auctioned in the event. As for when it would be auctioned, the Black Chief did not tell him due to the star-picking pavilion's rules, hence Jian Wushuang had no idea either. However, as the auction reached its finale, only 3 treasures were left, and since the stately painting had not appeared, it was clearly part of the 3 stars of the auction. Stars of the auction. What did star mean? Naturally, they would be the most valuable items and would receive the highest bids in the auction. For the star-picking pavilion to consider the stately painting a star of the auction, its final bid would be very high. Moreover, the heavenly ultimate gods on the 3rd floor and the experts from powerful clans would surely notice that treasure. They most probably would stand up and compete for it, trying to outbid those powerful clans. Jian Wushuang was truly not confident at all with that little bit of wealth he possessed. Let's see. He'll have to think of other ways if it's not going to work. Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes. On the display stage, honored guests, will now begin the auctioning of the 1st star. Please take a look. The Golden Chief waved his hand as an ancient scroll painting that was turning yellow immediately appeared on the display stage. The scroll painting looked ordinary at a glance with nothing fascinating about it, such that nobody probably would lay their eyes on it, even if they saw it on the streets. However, none of the partakers in this auction were ordinary people. Naturally, they could notice the unusual qualities of the scroll painting. Its extraordinary qualities originated from its energy so ancient and mysterious that no one could figure it out. Everyone was staring at the scroll painting, but they felt as though they were staring into thin air or a shroud of mist. It was truly a strange feeling. Treasure. This is absolutely a unique and extraordinary treasure. Right away, the experts in the auction passed their judgments. Although they could not tell what the scroll painting was, they were certain it was an incredible treasure. While in the individual room, Jian Wushuang's pupils contracted immediately the moment he saw the painting. His body uncontrollably shook. Nobody else could identify the scroll painting, but he could with just a glance. That scroll painting had accompanied him for a long period of time. It even helped him out of limbo time. And again, the stately painting. It was his ultimate treasure. Even till then, he could still feel a connection with the stately painting in its current situation. The sense of connection was still very strong. Were it not for the restrictive shield around the edges of the display stage blocking his energy projection, he could have immediately reconnected with the stately painting, and it would most certainly become excited. My old brother, we finally met again. Jian Wushuang clenched his fists, his nails buried into his flesh. I take that all of you have recognized the extraordinary quality of this scroll painting. If that's the case, please let me make an introduction. The Golden Chief's voice resonated in the auction house. This item is called Stately Painting and was passed to the star-picking pavilion by a territorial lord of a stellar region in Danyang, Holy Domain. According to the territorial lord, the origin of this treasure is extremely mysterious. It did not originate from any ruin, nor did it come from any expert's offspring. Instead, it was taken out of a shattered void, while a pair of ultimate gods were fighting. The experts in the auction were rather shocked upon hearing his words. The void shattered, and the treasure appeared in that shattered void. Was the treasure really that mysterious? Chapter 2608. Auctioning the Stately Painting. We have researched it since obtaining this treasure and had uncovered a message from it. The message is the stately painting, the endless mountains and streams, dividing the world into 9 continents, the mountains and rivers as the palms, and the 9 continents as the seal which created the world. The Golden Chief paused on purpose when he reached that point of his speech. As expected, it caused quite a stir in the auction, with countless experts standing up in an uproar. The stately painting, the endless mountains and streams, dividing the world into 9 continents, the mountains and rivers as the palms, and the 9 continents as the seal which created the world. It was a simple message. However, it was very domineering. Treasure, an absolute rare treasure. Many had their eyes burning with desire. Too bad. Although the star-picking pavilion managed to extract the message from the treasure, recognize its uniqueness, and knowing that it's indeed an extraordinary treasure, we could not make it recognize us as its master despite the various methods we took. However, that doesn't prove anything, as if it meets the right person, perhaps the treasure might recognize him as its master, said the Golden Chief. The experts all nodded. There were indeed certain extraordinary treasures that would choose its own master. It only proved that the treasure did not look too highly upon him if that person could not make it recognize him as its master. However, if that person was fated for this treasure, it would naturally identify him as its master upon meeting him. None of the experts in the star-picking pavilion could make the stately painting recognize a master. It only proved that the treasure had very high standards and naturally made its price shockingly high. A great number of experts in the auction, including the 2nd and 3rd floor experts, began to feel excited about it. Let's begin the bidding for the first star of the auction, the stately painting. The starting price is 100 million primordial stones. The Golden Chief projected his voice. As soon as the starting price was announced, a collective exclamation of shock resonated in the entire auction. The starting price itself was already 100 million primordial stones, and that was a first for the auction. The starting price had shattered most people's desire toward the stately painting. Even though there were numerous experts in the auction, those who immediately could present 100 million primordial stones were far and few. Moreover, the 100 million primordial stones were only the starting price. Jian Wushuang's face turned slightly gloomy when he heard the starting price. However, he immediately sat down slowly, as though he had already calmed down. In his eyes, though, a sharp light was violently piercing out. There's absolutely no way I will be able to obtain it through the auction since the starting price is already 100 million. If that's the case, I'll have to resort to other methods, mumbled Jian Wushuang to himself. Although 100 million primordial stones was an exorbitant starting price, there were quite a few people in the third floor's rooms who could afford it. Those people had started bidding. 150 million primordial stones. A young master dressed in an expensive purple long robe sat casually in an individual room while holding a paper fan. Next to him was a sitting figure that projected waves of overpowering energy. The young master wore a slight smile before he murmured, "The stately painting is truly extraordinary and worthy of me taking action. Even if the treasure doesn't recognize anyone as its master after bringing it back to life and Death Tower, we could still give it away as a present and not lose much. However, if we are lucky to absorb the treasure, we will gain a lot. 200 million. A statue-like dark figure standing in an individual room. The figure was clad in black robes as cold energy seeped out from him as he stared at the stately painting on the display stage with a strange light in his eyes. A sense of greed could be seen deep inside his pupils. 300 million primordial stones. A bald and plump teenager, holding a fruit, made his bid. A heaven ultimate god, old man frowned next to him and said, "Master Uncle, we didn't bring many primordial stones this time. Only a rough total of 150 million, and we're only at the first star of the auction. Although the stately painting is truly extraordinary, purchasing it comes with risks. If we spend too much to buy this item, we'll only be able to watch others bid for the next 2 stars of the auction." "I know that." The bald teenager continued munching on his fruit and smiled demonically before saying, "It's exactly because we didn't bring a lot of primordial stones that I purposely raised the bidding price so that the Dongfang clan and young palace master of Namu Palace will competitively offering even higher bids to fight for the stately painting. It will then put us in advantage when we bid for the next 2 treasures." The bald young man was not too interested in the stately painting, but still kept bidding a higher price. He immediately raised the bid to 500 million when the young palace master of Namu Palace made an offer of 400 million primordial stones. The price continued and very quickly shot to a sky-high price under the competition between these high rollers. At that moment, in an unremarkable individual room on the 3rd floor of the auction house, an expert was in that room, but if anyone were observant enough, they would discover that he did not bid once to fight for even a single treasure since the auction started. Even after the stately painting appeared, the man in that individual room did not show the slightest bit of interest. In the room was a simple-looking, white-haired old man clad in gray. The white-haired old man with murky eyes was sitting still like a meditating old monk. Nobody could tell if his eyes were opened or closed. Standing before him were 3 people. Among them was the purple-robed man, the supervisor of the Star-Picking Pavilion's Narcissus Territory branch. The other 2 were that branch's golden chiefs. The bald man was one of the 2 golden chiefs who had a relationship with Sen Shouwang and showed a certain interest in Jian Wushuang. The golden chiefs of Star-Picking Pavilion enjoyed a high status in the auction house since there were only 3 golden chiefs at the Star-Picking Pavilion's Narcissus Territory branch. The supervisor held the highest authority at the branch, of course, that even the golden chiefs had to answer to him. His ability was also shockingly powerful, as he was at the very limits of high-level Heaven Ultimate God, with only a step away from reaching peak Heaven Ultimate God. However, the supervisor and his 2 golden chiefs stood respectfully before the white-haired old man with their heads bowed extremely low without showing any defiance at that moment. Chapter 26:09. Senior Meng, to what do we owe this honor? The supervisor of Star Picking Pavilion respectfully asked. I'm here for the stately painting, said the white-haired old man slowly. The stately painting? Didn't headquarters pass the stately painting to us for auction? The purple-robed man frowned. The white-haired old man. Senior Meng lightly spoke. It's true, but the stately painting is different from other treasures. I've investigated it with those from the headquarters, and all of us reached the same conclusion. The stately painting is a treasure that completely surpassed all levels of heavenly treasure, which is to say it's at least a holy treasure. Moreover, it's absolutely not an ordinary holy treasure. What? The faces of the purple supervisor and his two golden chiefs turned pale from shock. Surpassing the levels of a heavenly treasure, a holy treasure, even among undying saints, there were only an extremely few who had exceptionally strong abilities or heaven-defying luck for them to own one or two holy treasures. The completely shocked purple supervisor asked, Senior Meng, why did the headquarters let us sell it since it's a holy treasure? He only complied with the order from the headquarters in asking them to put the stately painting up for auction. However, the Star Picking Pavilion's headquarters never told them the treasure's actual level. Only when they heard it from Senior Meng were they shocked. That was a holy treasure. What was it doing in an auction like that? Furthermore, those who were fighting over the item were only a bunch of earthly ultimate gods and heavenly ultimate gods. Senior Meng indifferently said, This matter is out of the ordinary. After we have appraised the stately painting as a very powerful and unique holy treasure, we spent a fortune to hire someone very important in helping us to make the stately painting recognize a master. That person has also agreed to help. However, he found that the stately painting has somehow already established a hidden connection with someone in the end. It's evident the stately painting is an owned item for it to possess that kind of connection. An owned item? The purple supervisor was startled. The treasure isn't something we can cultivate and absorb easily since it already has an owner. According to its history, it was coincidentally taken out of a void. We could then determine the stately painting has lost its master due to a certain reason. It's exactly because of that we dare not even keep this treasure in the star-picking pavilion any longer. This treasure is of an extremely high level after all. Its master who could cultivate, absorb, and control it must be someone who has extraordinary abilities. He's most probably a peak undying saint who possesses extremely terrifying abilities. He could also be in existence like Sword Lord Tong Xian, who stood above other undying saints. He could even be someone who has surpassed those saints, a titanic figure, who enjoys a huge reputation in the entire ancient god domain. A super expert like that isn't someone who should be crossed, even for star-picking pavilion. If the stately painting continues to stay in the star-picking pavilion, we can't guarantee the powerhouse won't show up at our door one day by tracing the hidden connection. We will be in deep trouble by then. Therefore, we have decided to send this stately painting back to Danyang Holy Domain, where it was first discovered after our discussion by selling the item in the Holy Domain's biggest auction. The news will spread once the treasure is sold. If its owner is currently in Danyang Holy Domain, he will naturally look for it after hearing the news and ask for the item to be returned to him. Even if he isn't in Danyang Holy Domain, the treasure won't have much to do with our star-picking pavilion, as he won't find it with us if its master comes to our doorsteps, spoke Senior Meng calmly. Is that so? The purple supervisor and his two golden chiefs took a nervous breath while listening to him. They began to feel pity toward those who were still trying to outbid each other over the stately painting. All of them thought that the stately painting was an extremely high-level treasure, which was indeed true. However, The stately painting was also a dangerous item that nobody should touch at the same time. If someone obtained it, he might be visited by a certain superior being. Senior Meng mumbled. The reason I personally came today is to see who will obtain the stately painting in the end. After that, I shall follow that person so that I can perhaps meet the superior being. The purple supervisor and his two golden chiefs dared not dare say more. In the auction, the bidding price of the stately painting had gone up to 1,180,000,000, and it was still going up. However, there were only two people left who were still bidding. The two of them were Nanwu Palace's young palace master and the beautiful lady from Dongfang clan. 1,200,000,000 primordial stones. The beautiful lady from Dongfang clan bid again as her cold voice resonated in the auction house at the same time. Young palace master, it's just a unique treasure. Although its level is most probably high, it doesn't easily recognize a master. Do you really want to keep competing against me? If the next two treasures are even better than this stately painting, will you have enough capital to bid for those? Ha. I don't need you to worry about whether I have enough capital to bid for the next two items. Truth be told, I recently visited an extraordinary ruin and discovered quite a bit of resource before coming here. Even though they aren't worth a lot, they are still worth nearly 2 billion. Even if the stately painting still doesn't recognize a master after I obtained it, I could just treat it as a wasted trip to the ruins. The young palace master of Nanwu Palace laughed heartily. 1,300,000,000. The beautiful lattice face turned gloomy after she heard what he said. The Dongfang clan had a deep financial foundation, and their wealth truly spoke louder than words. The beautiful lady happened to be one of the people who had control over the clan's properties, hence the amount she could control was extremely large. Though however large, it was still unwise to spend more than 1 billion primordial stones to purchase a unique treasure that contained certain risks. 1,300,000,000 primordial stones was her limit. Forget it. I shall fulfill your desire since you crave the stately painting so much, said the beautiful lady before falling silent, who had apparently given up on competing. Thank you. Nanwu Palace's young palace master laughed. Finally, the stately painting fell into his hands with a final bidding price of 1,300,000,000 primordial stones. Chapter 2610. Huangji Golden Pill in the individual room. Jian Wushuang sat calmly, but his expression was quite frosty. He raised his head and stared at the room of Nanwu Palace's young palace master. His eyes were burning with fire. Nanwu Palace's young palace master. My old brother, please hang in there. I'll find you very soon. Jian Wushuang mumbled, but his voice was extremely cold. The auction continued. After the stately painting, the second star of the auction was presented. The second star of the auction was like the spiritual stone staff that Jian Wushuang sold, a treasure related to the soul. The only difference being a defensive soul treasure of the high-level heavenly treasure. It was common knowledge, no matter the type of treasure, that a defensive treasure was always more valuable than an offensive one. For example, an offensive divine treasure's worth was never as high as a defensive armor at the same level. A defensive soul treasure was also more valuable than an offensive soul treasure of the same level. The only difference was their not-so-large price variance. Even though it was a defensive soul treasure at the ordinary level heavenly treasure, it was still a lot more valuable than the spiritual stone staff Jian Wushuang sold. Not to mention the soul defense treasure presented was already at high-level heavenly treasure. An increase of one level would increase the treasure's price by tenfold. The auction immediately started. The starting bid was still 10 million primordial stones, with the bids placed by experts in the third-floor individual rooms. Divine Demon Sect, Life and Death Tower, Nanwu Palace, and Dongfang clan were competing fiercely with each other. Nanwu Palace and Dongfang clan especially competed for them fiercely. In the end, the treasure's price shot up to an astronomical figure of 1,800,000,000 primordial stones. The winning bidder for the item was the beautiful lady from Dongfang clan. My brother's abilities are incomparably great. He's even one of the best among peak ultimate gods. Unfortunately, he's weaker when it comes to soul power and will be at a disadvantage when he's facing highly skilled experts in soul offense. This high-level heavenly treasure soul defensive treasure is just the right thing for him. Although we spent 1,800,000,000 primordial stones, it's worth it as long as it can help my brother improve his shortcoming, said the beautiful lady to herself. The bidding for the second star of the auction had ended. It was the auction for the third treasure star next, and also the auction's last treasure. Countless experts in the auction were waiting impatiently for the treasure. Each of the 3 treasure stars was incredibly valuable. One was sold for 1,300,000,000 primordial stones, while the other was sold for a total of 1,800,000,000 primordial stones. However, everybody knew the last star would truly be the most valuable item in the entire auction. That was the true star of the auction. Those experts in the auction knew very well that the last star treasure was not something ordinary people like them were qualified to bid for, but they were still filled with curiosity. They were wondering what that last treasure would be. On the display stage, the Golden Chief did not let them wait for too long as he soon displayed the final treasure. Apparently, it was a golden elixir pill with a thick fragrance that made all those experts drool. That golden elixir pill was about the size of a baby's thumb with an extremely dark color. At the same time, the energy projected by the pill was unique. That energy felt like the energy of an emperor. Yes, an emperor's energy. Most experts in the auction looked perplexed when facing the elixir pill on the display stage. Some experts on the second and third floor individual rooms managed to identify the elixir pill. That's a Huangji golden pill. Yes, it's a Huangji golden pill. My goodness, the last treasure is actually a Huangji golden pill. That's crazy. Those 4 powers are going to go nuts. Waves of exclamations could be heard from the individual rooms. It was indeed true. The faces of those from Nanwu Palace, Divine Demon Sect, Life and Death Tower, and Dongfang clan turned bright red and became breathless from the excitement when they saw the golden elixir pill. It's a Huangji golden pill. What an auction house star-picking pavilion is. The young palace master of Nanwu Palace had bright lights shining through his eyes. He immediately stood up and said, "I have to get this Huangji golden pill no matter what it takes." Damn it! If I knew the last item is the Huangji golden pill, I won't have bought that soul defensive treasure for my brother. I've spent 1,800,000,000 primordial stones in one go to purchase it. Now, I don't have much left. The expression of the Dongfang clan's beautiful lady froze. Quick, immediately inform the clan and tell them to collect as many primordial stones for me as possible by all means. They can also bring cultivation resources of equal values. The heavenly ultimate gods of Dongfang clan nodded in full commitment. They knew it was an important matter. The experts learned more about the Huangji golden pill following the Golden Chief introducing it in the auction. A Huangji golden pill was extremely well known in the ancient god domain with its shockingly wide usage. It only worked on ultimate gods with its effects almost equivalent to that of a divine demon nirvana elixir for divine demons. Divine demon nirvana elixir could help ordinary divine demons make a breakthrough in their cultivation in an extremely profound way. As for the Huangji golden pill, it could help ultimate god experts raise their cultivation level. Moreover, Those who were below Heavenly Ultimate God level could have an 80% chance of making a breakthrough to the next level after taking a Huangji Golden Pill. For those who were above the Heavenly Ultimate God level, the probability of making a breakthrough was still extremely high after taking a Huangji Golden Pill. Most importantly, it even had great effects on Grand Ultimate Gods. According to hearsay, if a powerful peak Heavenly Ultimate God took a Huangji Golden Pill, there was a 50% chance he could make a breakthrough to the Grand Ultimate God level. If a primary level Grand Ultimate God had eaten a Huangji Golden Pill, he would have nearly a 30% probability to make a breakthrough to high-level Grand Ultimate God. Even for a high-level Grand Ultimate God, he would still have a 10% probability to reach toward peak Grand Ultimate God by taking the Huangji Golden Pill. With such effects, it was extremely attractive to every Heavenly Ultimate God and Grand Ultimate God, especially for the top powers of Danyang Holy Domain, Nanwu Palace, Divine Demon Sect, Life and Death Tower, and Dongfang Clan. There has been no undying saint holding the fort at Danyang Holy Domain ever since the fall of Crimson Stone Saint. The Crimson Stone Fort was only superficially seen as the authority, while those few top powers only had a few Grand Ultimate God as their strongest expert. Chapter 26:11. Big Problema Grand Ultimate God was just too rarely seen. If any of the top powers have even 10 Grand Ultimate Gods, it was considered very impressive. Each of those Grand Ultimate Gods was also the top power's main support pillars, as they possessed the highest battle strength level. Losing even a single one of them was an unimaginably huge loss. At the same time, it could bring them up a level if they could have one more Grand Ultimate God. Therefore, the Huangji Golden Pill, which offered a peak Heaven Ultimate God a 50% chance to make a breakthrough into Grand Ultimate God, was extremely important to them. The auction for the Huangji Golden Pill soon began. The starting bid itself was already 1 billion primordial stones. In a very short period, the price had gone up to 2 billion, which was double the starting bid. Moreover, the experts in the third floor individual rooms, especially those who were representing the top powers, had been competing with each other fiercely, hence the price continued to climb. This is insane. That's too crazy. It's already 30 billion primordial stones, and yet they continue to bid. 30 billion is an unimaginable number for me. Waves of exclamations were filling the auction house. As time flew by, the Huangji Golden Pill's price had climbed up to an astronomical 50 billion. At that rate, there were not many left who could continue bidding. In the end, it was again the young palace master of Nanwu Palace and the beautiful lady from Dongfang Clan who competed against each other. The beautiful lady coldly asked, "How many resources can we move around?" "We only have 52 billion primordial stones when adding on to the amount the clan had temporarily transferred to us with what we have now. That's everything we can gather in such a short time," said one of the Heaven Ultimate Gods. 52 billion. The beautiful lady made her final bid without hesitation. At that moment, Nanwu Palace's young palace master wore a dark expression as he was also calculating the number of resources he could control. "Fortunately, I found quite a bit of stuff at the ruins. Even though I have spent quite a lot on the stately painting, I could still outbid the Dongfang Clan woman with the remaining 60 billion or so when adding on to my properties and the resources that were prepared beforehand by the palace. 53 billion. As the young palace master made his bid again, the Dongfang Clan's room turned silent. Not competing anymore, the young palace master of Nanwu Palace shot a cold glance at Dongfang Clan's room. Humph! A cold harumph came out of that individual room. "You truly are the young palace master of Nanwu Palace to bring so many resources with you. You win this time, but don't get cocky now, as even though you spent an incredible amount on this Huangji Golden Pill, it's still a question whether you safely can bring it back to Nanwu Palace." "Oh, are you trying to scare me, Madame Dongfang?" Nanwu Palace's young palace master coldly said. "I'm not trying to scare you, of course. After all, how many in the Danyang Holy Domain can really scare the young palace master of Nanwu Palace? However, Huangji Golden Pill is such a precious item, and many desperately desire it. I'm merely reminding you out of kindness due to the friendship between the Dongfang clan and Nanwu Palace. I have no desire to worry about the rest, so take care." As the beautiful lady finished speaking, she stood up and started leaving the room. The auction for the last star treasure had ended, which indicated the end of the auction event. Naturally, the beautiful lady had no reason to continue staying there. Not only her, but also most of those experts who took part in the auction left with sighs and feelings of loss. Of course, several experts did not immediately leave, especially those in the third-floor individual rooms. Most of those powerful heaven ultimate gods did not immediately leave. Although they were staying inside their respective rooms, their eyes were burning with greed while staring at Nanwu Palace's young palace master's room. The young palace master and the beautiful lady of Dongfang clan did not hide their identity when competing at all. Everyone also knew that 2 of the 3 treasure stars had fallen into the young palace master's hands, and the star treasures were very attractive to those heaven ultimate gods, especially the Huangji Golden Pill. That's a big problem. Jian Wushuang was still staying in his room and began to frown. Although he could not see the facial expressions of the heaven ultimate gods on the 3rd floor, he could guess what was running through their minds. A Huangji Golden Pill was enough for them to go insane and do whatever it takes to obtain it. Although the Huangji Golden Pill was in the hands of the young palace master, his strong family background and those few heaven ultimate gods around him could not fend away the experts who were drooling over the pill. In other words, he had become everyone's target. He would be fine as long as he stayed inside the star-picking pavilion. However, as soon as he left their place, just like what the beautiful lady from Dongfang clan said, although he had obtained the Huangji Golden Pill, it was questionable whether he could safely bring it back to Nanwu Palace. As for Jian Wushuang, he had not much interest in the Huangji Golden Pill, even though it was very valuable. The only item he wanted was the stately painting. Earlier, he was the only one targeting Nanwu Palace's young palace master, and was already not confident about taking the stately painting from him. However, his problem just grew even bigger since so many people were targeting young palace master at that point. Well, looks will have to play by ear. Jian Wushuang squinted slightly. In Nanwu Palace's room on the 3rd floor, young palace master, we've brought the stately painting and Huangji Golden Pill over. The Golden Chief, who hosted the auction, personally presented the 2 treasures to the young palace master. The young palace master simply took a glance at it and immediately passed an interspatial ring he had prepared earlier to the Golden Chief. Following the successful transaction, both treasures were in the young palace master's possession without ordeal. The treasures are at hand, but to leave this place and return safely to Nanwu Palace will be quite a challenge. The young palace master of Nanwu Palace frowned. It will be a breeze if they are only ordinary treasures. Even if they are more valuable ones, those heaven ultimate god won't have the guts to come at me for that treasure. However, the Huangji Golden Pill is different, as it's sufficient to make any heaven ultimate god go crazy. There should be quite a few heaven ultimate gods taking part in the auction, and all of them know that Huangji Golden Pill is in my possession. I'm afraid a siege is inevitable as soon as I leave this place. Chapter 26:12. Battle begins. Transmit a message into the palace and tell them to send reinforcements, said the young palace master of Nanwu Palace. One of the heaven ultimate gods of Nanwu Palace immediately did as he was ordered. The auction had ended completely. Most experts had left. Only a few top experts were still staying in Star-Picking Pavilion. The people of Nanmu Palace were still there as well. Even though many experts were lusting over Huangji Golden Pill, they dared not take immediate action and had to control themselves as they were in a Star-Picking Pavilion branch after all. They were waiting for the people of Nanmu Palace to leave the Star-Picking Pavilion. Jian Wushuang was waiting quietly as well. The wait took a total of 10 days. After 10 days, the young palace master of Nanmu Palace finally began to depart. As soon as the Nanmu Palace people stepped out of Star-Picking Pavilion, a large number of experts, including Jian Wushuang, immediately followed behind. That's a lot of people. There are too many experts targeting him. Jian Wushuang's eyes were showing worries. As he glided along, he expanded his soul power and sensed the energy of the experts around him in detail. There were 100 of them at the Earth Ultimate God realm or above. Even though Earth Ultimate Gods were just there to watch and did not plan to join in the action, there were still more than 20 Heaven Ultimate Gods pursuers. Not for a minute did Jian Wushuang ever think the 20 over Heaven Ultimate God was there to just watch instead of taking action. Besides, that number was only those who Jian Wushuang's soul power could sense. He believed more experts were hiding in the surrounding void who have kept their presence hidden. With this many experts targeting Huangji Golden Pill, when the battle starts, Jian Wushuang shuddered. The crowd followed behind the young palace master. They very soon left the city and arrived at the wide borderless void. They're probably going to start, mumbled Jian Wushuang to himself. As he expected, he could sense several Heaven Ultimate Gods speed accelerated and caught up to block the path of those Nanmu Palace men within the sensing parameters of his soul power. In only a short moment, you're only a few Heaven Ultimate Gods and dare touch Nanmu Palace. Perhaps you're sick of living. The Nanmu Palace's young palace master's growl resonated between heaven and earth. Following the growl, the Heaven Ultimate Gods unleashed their heaven-shaking divine aura and took action. The big battle began in a blink. Boom, 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 boom. The terrifying booming sounds exploded one after another, while clanging noises could be heard from the void ahead. The noises resonated throughout the heavens, and the immense divine power expanded to a great distance. Although Jian Wushuang and the rest of the Earth Ultimate Gods who were there to watch the action were quite a distance away from the battlegrounds, they could still feel the intense clashing of energy in the fight, which made their hearts pounded violently. Even Jian Wushuang was shocked. He was not considered weak at that point when it came to ability. Although his level was quite low at just a peak Ultimate God, his battle strength was strong enough to face a peak Earth Ultimate God. Therefore, he was still considered very powerful even when standing among actual peak Earth Ultimate Gods. However, the void ahead was filled with not just 1 or 2 Heaven Ultimate Gods battling, but more than 10. Such a battle was really not something he could interfere in. Excluding the young palace master, Nanmu Palace only has 4 Heaven Ultimate Gods. Although they are very strong, they are facing the attack of a dozen Heaven Ultimate Gods and won't be able to withstand it. In addition, there are still quite a few Heaven Ultimate Gods in the surrounding void who are drooling over Huangji Golden Pill, but yet to take action. Nanmu Palace seems to be in a less than ideal situation. However, the Nanmu Palace people aren't fools either. They probably know that they are being watched. The fact that they dare walk out of Star-Picking Pavilion must mean they have something to rely on. If my guess is right, there have to be quite a few Nanmu Palace experts hiding somewhere in the surrounding void. Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes and looked around. Just as he expected, when the battle only went on for a short moment, and the 4 Heaven Ultimate Gods were at a disadvantage. Boom, boom, boom. 10 waves of overpowering energy suddenly burst in from one direction. The sudden appearance of the 10 men left the Heaven Ultimate Gods in battle shocked beyond belief. Even the observers outside the battlefield were incredibly surprised. The shock was only natural because the lineup of those 10 was too powerful. Among the 10 men, 8 of them were Heaven Ultimate Gods, while the other 2 were a blonde youth and red-bearded, strong-looking man with a battle axe. The energy they were projecting was far beyond the Heaven Ultimate Gods and reaching an all-new level, Grand Ultimate Gods. The 2 of them were complete Grand Ultimate Gods in the flesh and blood. As soon as the 2 Grand Ultimate Gods and 8 Heaven Ultimate Gods arrived, the men from Nanwu Palace, including the young palace master, rushed over to them. They were no doubt also from Nanwu Palace. 2 Grand Ultimate Gods, 8 Heaven Ultimate Gods. What a lineup! Jian Wushuang clenched his fists. The many expert observers around were also exclaiming, "This is grand! So grand! Nanwu Palace is truly worthy of its reputation. They could afford to send over such a lineup in one go. No wonder the young palace master dared come out of the star-picking pavilion. Looks like Nanwu Palace has set its mind on keeping the Huangji golden pill." The crowd exclaimed all together. In the middle of the battlefield, the dozen of Heaven Ultimate Gods who attacked Nanwu Palace was in trouble. "You're really tired of living since you dare target Nanwu Palace. Kill 'em all." The 10 men who came from Nanwu Palace immediately attacked under the 2 Grand Ultimate Gods' leadership. The table turned in an instant. On the edge of the battlefield, the slender, gray-clad, white-haired Senior Meng squinted and stood in the void. Behind him were the very respectful star-picking pavilion's purple supervisor and his 3 golden chiefs. Naturally, they very clearly saw everything that transpired on the battlefield. That's Nanwu Palace for you, sending out 2 Grand Ultimate Gods and 8 Heaven Ultimate Gods in one go. "Looks like no one can stop them from keeping Huangji golden pill," exclaimed the purple supervisor. "Haha, it's not that simple." Senior Meng smiled faintly. The puzzled purple supervisor asked, "Senior Meng, do you mean that things might change? I can tell from the looks of it." Senior Meng did not elaborate further, but wore a mysterious smile instead. As he predicted, a few beams of overpowering energy burst out from the surrounding void not long after the arrival of those 10 Nanwu Palace experts. 3 Grand Ultimate Gods and a few very powerful Heaven Ultimate Gods immediately appeared on the battlefield.